The following is a presentation from the MJCast, the internet's premier podcast on all things Michael Jackson.
I'm a Black American. I am proud of who I am.
Together, we can make a change in the world.
I want to see you!
I like to take sounds and put them under the microscope.
There's a driving bass, you become the bass. Let the music write itself.
I don't sing it if I don't mean it.
Welcome to the MJCast, your source of news, discussion, and interviews on the King of Pop. Hello, and welcome to episode 166 of the MJCast. I'm your host, Jamon Bull, and I'm here with a great panel today. We're going to cover all things Michael Jackson news-related, and then we're going to get into a pretty exciting fan chat. We're going to hear an awesome fan story for Mr. Danny Oliver, which we'll get to shortly. But first of all, I'll welcome a few of our guests. We got 5 people on the show today, including myself. Firstly, I will welcome Mr. Charlie Thomson. How are you, Charlie?
I'm okay. How are you doing?
Doing really well, thanks. Thanks for being on again.
Well, it's always a pleasure.
Charlie Carter, calling in from Studio Sydney. How are you? Just about to move house, I hear.
Indeed, yeah. So this won't be the studio for much longer, but good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time it is when you're listening to everyone. And thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure. We also have here friend of the show, Anika Kotecha, lawyer from London and was on our Leaving Neverland roundtable. Welcome back to the MJCast, Anika.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Really exciting to speak with you again. Last but not least, Anika, we've got one of your very, very close friends here, Mr. Danny Oliver. How are you, Danny?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
We're so excited to have you. You're somebody we've wanted to talk to for a very long time. It's your first time on the MJCast.
Yes, finally, I'm here.
Yeah. Have you listened to much of our podcast before?
I have, yeah. Particularly Charlie's interview with Brett is a big standout for me.
We were very lucky to be able to capture that. Still feel super lucky today.
Really amazing.
Let's get straight into the news. We've had a fairly big development in the Michael world just within the last week, and it's not every day a full Michael Jackson song leaks out, but that has happened. And, you know, we've all got different thoughts on leaks and whether they're good or bad or whatever. I guess we can't really control them. They happen one way or another. We've had a full song come out, and I don't think that's happened in quite a while. We've definitely had bootleg quality stuff come out, but this one is a digital quality recording. The song is Can't Get Your Weight Off Me from the Invincible sessions. I believe it's a Rodney Jerkins track, a song that was not selected to be on the final track list. Interestingly, going back into MJCast history a little bit, this is the song that we were played by Michael Prince when we interviewed him back in the day. I don't know how many years ago now. Charlie Thomson, I think you were on that episode, weren't you?
I was, yeah, I do remember that.
At one point, we were talking about the Ultimate Collection or something like that, and he was going back through the tracks that were considered for that. He stumbled across Can't Get Your Weight Off Me and played it, and we got to hear it then. But finally, it has come out. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think of the song and whether it was the right call to leave it off the Invincible album. Let's start with Anika. What do you think about Can't Get Your Weight Off Me?
I like it. I think it's got a good beat. It's catchy. It's a good track. It's astounding that we are still getting leaks like this because the official line is there's nothing left when clearly there is. But aside from that, I did really like the song.
Do you think the right call was made? Is there a particular track on Invincible, if you were in charge, you would have swapped out for this one?
I think it sounds quite a lot like Privacy, this one. Between the two, I guess it's a toss-up. I don't think you could have had both on the album.
This is funny for me because Charlie and I had a back and forth via text, which was very entertaining regarding our opinions on this song. But I really like it. I mean, I really do. Like to jam to move to, it drives me nuts. I love it. And I can really feel it's an evolution or in the works of like a blend of Privacy and Invincible. You can hear it's kind of its infancy stage where I think those two songs possibly were born in some kind of capacity. I really like it a lot. And in regard to things being leaked. I mean, I think like if the MJ estate aren't doing squat, then why the hell not? You know what I mean?
Charlie Thomson, I can only imagine what you must think of this song being the fan club president of Invincible.
Well, you could just copy and paste my sort of 5-minute diatribe from episode 164 if you want, and just replay that. I think, look, it's not very good, and it's clear to me listening to it that this is a track from early in the Invincible sessions, and bits of it became other songs. You can hear Invincible in it, you can hear Privacy in it. So that's probably why it wasn't released. One not very good song spawned two more not very good songs.
Oh God. Yeah, Charlie is like 100% pro number one Invincible fan.
So Invincible is your favorite album, right, Charlie?
It's my favorite Michael Jackson album from 2001.
Okay.
And also my least favorite.
You've pretty much all covered the points that I would make about when I listen to this song. You can definitely hear elements of Privacy. There's a line in there. There's a lesson to learn, which obviously headed over to another song. Definitely elements of, I felt like 2000 Watts, Invincible, and Threatened. I don't mind it. It's probably a decent song and in line with the sound that Michael was going for at that time. Am I surprised it was left off the album? No, not really, because as Charlie Thomson just said, it spawned a couple of other songs that did make it to the album. Or at least that's what it sounds like anyway. But I don't dislike it, but I'm also not going to be rushing out to get any copy of it that I can.
Isn't Invincible the era when Michael was having some issues with Sony anyway, so maybe wasn't putting his 100% into that particular album?
Well, there was reports at the time that he was basically just showing up at the studio and recording vocals and leaving again.
Yeah.
That he was really not very interested in the whole project.
Wasn't it I owe you X number of albums, so here you go?
Yeah, songs with about 8 writers on them, that sort of thing, where Michael's coming in and changing a word, singing it, and then buggering off again, basically.
But then at the same time, by Michael's testimony, you hear him saying how he was working people so hard in the studio, so obsessively, in a desperate bid to get that perfection that he was always after, that people were going nuts. Yeah, I've heard interviews where, he said how he was going over and over, but then of course we hear this other side where he wasn't as present practically and maybe creatively. It's an interesting one because it's an interesting period around Michael's career and life. Whatever was going along, the slight corner that he turned or slope that he was sliding down, kind of with the Madison Square Garden appearance. Well, we've heard that apparently he was sleeping while the whole arena was waiting for him and he had to be woken up. And so it's an interesting discussion as to where Michael's head may or may not have been at that particular time.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we also need to remember too, he was in a very different stage of his life. Like he was essentially a single father with 2 kids at that point. And he had done a lot of this before. He had done lots of albums before for the Jackson 5, the Jacksons, all of his solo efforts. And I just think it was in a stage of his career that maybe, I don't know, maybe he wasn't as interested anymore. He had a lot of people on those songs. You listen to the demos for the Invincible tracks and they sound very, very much like, or if not the same as the finished version, just with a different singer. Even the Rodney Jerkins demos that we hear for songs like Threatened, he famously played the Threatened demo in an Instagram live, I think about a year ago. And it sounds very, very complete with, I think, singing by LaShawn Daniels. So I think in a lot of the cases for the songs on Invincible, Michael's probably showing up, singing the lyrics that he needs to, and calling it a day. When we compared footage from the Invincible recording sessions back to stuff that leaked out of Brad Thunberg's seminars, like footage of the Dangerous recording sessions, I don't know if you guys have seen that.
Yes,
He's like super, super engaged in the song construction, and I just don't get the same feeling from the Invincible sessions personally.
Yeah, and I think the Invincible album, it's funny because I've spoken to people over the years who were either familiar with it or hadn't yet heard Invincible at all, apart from You Rock My World, before I had played it for them. And it quickly became one of their favorite Michael albums. I mean, the best-selling R&B album of 2002. Song by song, some really, really great tracks in there.
There are some real gems in there.
Yeah, You Rock My World, Whatever Happens.
Butterflies.
Yeah, Butterflies, Break of Dawn, Invincible. I can imagine him being very particular with the production of something like Heartbreaker. I kind of feel like he was trying to peak a corner and raise the bar in terms of production and change it up a little bit. It was very electric. It is interesting to hear. As I said before, we have these one side where he wasn't very present, and then the other side, Michael's own testimony and interviews where he was nailing down so hard on people in the studio, making them do it again and again and again, that they were just becoming like creatively exhausted and getting mad at him. So
yeah,
they're kind of like the antithesis of one to another,
Yeah.
He had some visions for some of the short films, as he would have called them, for some of the songs that weren't ever realised. And I wonder if he had been able to unleash his creativity the way he might have wanted to. And we'd seen maybe a video to go with something like Heartbreaker, if that would have even elevated the song that much more.
I'm sure you guys remember Planet Jackson.
Yes.
I remember hearing that Unbreakable was going to be the next big short film, and The Rock actually confirmed this, Dwayne Johnson. I remember in an interview that he had done on, was it MTV TRL with, is it Carson Daly? In 2001, a few days before the show started, it was The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, Mel Gibson, and Chris Tucker and Michael in this, what was supposed to be a spectacular short film for Unbreakable. But of course, none of it just ever happened. I mean, you got various versions and cuts of You Rock My World, which we know Michael himself wasn't best pleased with. You had Cry, which he had nothing to do with in terms of the video for it. Michael's decisions off stage, outside of the studio at the time, were questionable as well. Like the kind of people he was having around him, the Uri Gellers, and dare I say the rabbi's name. I mean, I had gotten to know Uri Geller, and damn, even that was like shit, And I think Michael was just blindly being taken advantage of these people, and there was various unfavorable bad decisions being made at the time as well. So
Yeah.
it goes back to where his head was at the time, generally at that stage in his life, both personally and creatively.
Yeah, well, I think we'll get into a little bit more of that, Danny, too, when we later in the show, when we start walking through your fan story a little bit.
Yeah.
Just to finish up this topic, I don't mind the song. I actually probably, Danny, am a little bit more on your side of the fence there with this song. I quite like it, mainly because the production is that little bit more sparse, a little bit more gritty and organic. I've always felt like the first few tracks on Invincible in particular are very heavily overproduced. Heartbreaker in particular is a song I can really barely listen to these days. There's just so much going on in it. I've always thought there's good songs buried under the production in those first three tracks. If we could just kind of tone it down a little bit on the Rodney Jerkins side, there's some good songs buried in there. And I think Can't Get Your Weight Off Me is like that. It's sort of able to breathe a little bit because it doesn't have all that complicated production going on around it. Can't Get Your Weight Off Me and Escape in particular are stronger tracks than some of the other ones we did get on the album in the end. I personally wouldn't have minded if it was on there, but that's just me.
Escape is the best song of that era by miles.
I love Escape. I really love it.
Escape and We've Had Enough.
We've Had Enough is amazing.
We've Had Enough is just mind-blowing. I did a video with my friend for We've Had Enough. I wanted to put it on YouTube because for me, when I first heard that song, it was like with Whatever Happens. I used to play it on repeat, non-stop. And frame by frame, I had like visualized this short film for it. And I just thought, oh, what a loss that he wasn't going to kind of marry some visuals to this, because it's just mind-blowing, truly phenomenal.
We've Had Enough, I've always felt, should be an anthem. I think even more so than a song like Heal the World or Earth Song. If you look at what's going on in the world today, it is so relevant.
Absolutely.
I always wondered why that didn't get a release. Even now, it feels like if the estate really wanted to honour Michael's memory, they could release that as a single, and the proceeds from that could go to victims of wars. I mean, there's enough wars in the world. There's plenty of victims, and that song for me is such an anthem.
I agree. I mean, it's mad how it's just lost in the chaos of the Ultimate Collection, like because it's such a standout track. And didn't Michael write and record it? Was it with Carol Bayer-Sager in 2004? It was about the Iraqi War.
I think it was actually recorded much earlier than that. I don't know if the final production was done by the time the album was ready. I think it was continued to be worked on, but from memory, it's from the very, very early Invincible sessions from about 1999. And Michael started working with Carol and Rodney together on that particular track.
Wow. I'm just thinking, if it was for the Invincible sessions, how do you leave something like that off the table?
Yeah, especially like when we're thinking about the song Escape, it really feels like the spiritual successor to songs on the History album like Tabloid
Yes.
Junkie and Too Bad. And in some ways, Invincible seems like a little bit of a step back thematically. He's not dealing with as complex themes as we heard in the History album. So
Right.
I do agree. I think some of those songs could have made it on there.
We've Had Enough was originally titled Stop the War and was co-written in 1999 with Rodney Jerkins, LaShawn Daniels, and Carol Bayer-Sager.
Wow.
Let's change gears a little bit and we'll have a bit of an update from Charlie Thomson around two court cases that are currently going on. Charlie, if you could start us off with the one relating to Katherine Jackson and the MIJAC sale. We covered that a couple of episodes ago, but there have been some developments since then.
Yes, so the update really is that there is a bit of a legal skirmish between Katherine Jackson and Michael's son, BG. So it was reported originally that Katherine and Michael's kids, Paris and BG, were opposed to the sale of Michael's catalogue by his estate, and Prince was said to be neutral, and he would just abide by whatever the court's decision was. The court allowed the estate to go ahead with the sale, and Katherine appealed, and BG has now filed legal papers saying that he is opposed to the appeal, and he's trying to block the estate from paying Katherine's legal fees for the appeal, basically saying that the appeal was always destined to fail and money shouldn't be taken away from the heirs to pay for a waste of time appeal. It's a slightly bizarre position for him to take, to be perfectly honest, because Katherine is a beneficiary of the estate, just like the kids are. So 40% of Michael's earnings are assigned to Katherine, and her legal bills, I mean, I don't know what they're going to be, but they're not going to put much of a dent in the $1.5 billion that the estate has got to its name. So it seems something of a petty move by him. I don't know if he's been cajoled into it by lawyers or something, because of course the lawyers that are filing the lawsuit by BG to try to block Katherine from getting her legal fees will themselves be charging BG for his legal fees. So this is what you see with celebrity estates, is that there's always turmoil going on and there's always people making money out of it. Katherine has filed a response to BG basically saying what I just said, that the estate has got something like $1.5 billion to its name, and Katherine is a beneficiary of that estate. And if she wants her legal bills paid, then that's her money, and they should spend it to pay her legal bills. So we'll have to wait to see how that one turns out.
I think that the biggest surprise for me is what you said earlier about BG not wanting to use estate money for the appeal. But like you said, Katherine is also an heir. So that's the bit that confused me about it. I mean, I sort of understand Prince's position of, well, let the courts decide. But if Katherine wants to appeal it, she's well within her rights as an heir. But look, I'm not fully aware of the legal ramifications of one heir saying this and another heir saying that. In many ways, it's sad that Katherine and BG couldn't have had a private conversation and come to some common ground rather than having to go through the courts to do it.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. When you put it like that, you're talking about grandmother and grandchild. It's quite bizarre why that couldn't happen instead.
It does seem like a very strange situation because BG will know that Katherine is entitled to 40% of that anyway. And like you said, Charlie, either the money's going to pay Katherine's lawyers or the money's going to pay BG's lawyers. Either way, it's the lawyers that are benefiting. So it just seems like a very odd situation for them to be in.
I just think it's going to really make for a very awkward Thanksgiving dinner.
Especially considering she raised them after Michael passed away.
Yes, absolutely.
And she's in her, 90s now?
Yeah. I mean, if you talk about unnecessary stress at such an age.
Okay, so moving on to the Wade Robson James Safechuck civil suit, which rumbles on. I'm not going to go over the whole backstory. If you want to know the backstory, I think it's in episode 158 with me, Jamon, and John Cameron in there. I gave a sort of an off-the-cuff roundup of the case to date over the past 10 years. So the latest is, in the last episode I was on, which I think was number 164, I jumped the gun a bit and I said that the cases have been merged, i.e. Wade Robson and James Safechuck's separate civil claims against Michael's companies. I said in the last episode that they've been merged. What had happened was that they had applied to have the cases merged, and the estate/companies had said they would not oppose the merging of the cases. So it was a bit of a foregone conclusion. However, on the date that the episode came out, it hadn't quite happened yet. So we ended up chopping that out and reissuing the episode. And then about 24 hours later, they were actually merged. So I can now safely say the cases have been merged. So what that means is that the estate/companies will have one trial in which both Wade Robson and James Safechuck's abuse allegations will be tested, as opposed to separate trials for the two of them. The reason I keep saying estate/companies, for a full explanation of that, I do think it's episode 158. They are technically not suing Michael Jackson's estate because the estate represents Michael Jackson, and there was a statute of limitations as far as pursuing Michael Jackson. They had to do it within a certain number of years after he died, and they didn't do it. So what they've done is they've recalibrated and are suing a number of companies which existed at the time that Michael was still alive and still exist today. But of course, who runs all those companies is the estate, so it's the same thing. It's just a technical, legal bit of bullshit. So the latest developments, apart from the fact that the cases have been merged, the big one which is making the headlines internationally in the last couple of days is that Wade and Jimmy's lawyers are once again seeking access to the photographs that were taken of Michael Jackson by force by the Californian government. So in 1993, Jordan Chandler gave a description, allegedly, of Michael Jackson's genitals, and then a warrant was served on Michael Jackson, forcing him to submit to a naked photo shoot by police officers where they handled and photographed his genitals. Once again, I think this is the third time that this has happened over the last 10 years. Wade and Jimmy's lawyers have filed a motion saying that they want access to those photographs. Now, there is absolutely no evidential value at all to Wade and Jimmy in their case in those photographs. Thus far, in the 10 plus years of litigation, I have never seen a single deposition or document in which either of them has claimed that they can accurately describe Michael's genitals. They've never given a description. Even if they were to give a description, in 2005, Tom Sneddon filed a motion in which he described the photographs. So even if they were to say, this is our description, and now we want the photographs to prove it, that would be of absolutely no evidential value at all, because the description has been in the public domain for 20 years. So it's still absolutely worthless. So there is no value at all to them in obtaining these pictures. Absolutely none. So I think that the reasons for this are probably threefold. The first is that they knew it would, and it has generated enormous negative publicity for the estate. This is a very clear tactic of Wade and Jimmy's legal team and has been since the beginning. And Dan Reed, of course, is an arm of that legal team, effectively. He's like their personal videographer. And what you're seeing is Dan Reed and Wade and Jimmy's lawyers just giving comments and interviews to the press all the time, attacking Michael, attacking the estate, attacking the musical, attacking the biopic. Negative publicity is very much part of their strategy approaching this trial. They're trying to bombard potential jurors with negative publicity, effectively trying to poison the jury pool. And Dan Reed has recently given an interview suggesting that he plans to air another installment of Leaving Neverland before that trial takes place, which of course will be yet more negative publicity. So it's definitely, this is part of their trial strategy. It's just to poison the potential jury pool. The second reason, I think, is that this is probably, as has been the case with a lot of motions that have been filed by Wade and Jimmy's lawyers, they do seem to sometimes be filed for no reason other than to generate fodder for Dan Reed and for his cameras. It was a trend with Vince Finaldi. They have now changed lawyers. They've sacked off Vince Finaldi and replaced him with a guy called Carpenter. It has been part of their playbook ever since Leaving Neverland came out that Finaldi would go into court and file the most outlandish motions, which were absolutely doomed, just had no prospect of succeeding at all in law. But of course, if you're not a very well-versed legal person and you're watching a Dan Reed production, you're not going to know that all these motions are a complete waste of time and they're unwinnable in law. So I think it's part of a bigger PR plan. It's generating material that can be edited in a manipulative way into a sort of a piece of propaganda, whatever the next piece of Leaving Neverland is going to be, which will be positing Wade and Jimmy's lawyers as like the plucky lawyers taking on the big Jackson machine and getting struck down every turn. But they're not getting struck down because of the big bad Jackson legal team. They're getting struck down because these motions are not winnable, because they're just completely ludicrous. So I think that this is just another example of that, a bit like when Snedden filed that motion at the end of the trial in 2005. It was completely unwinnable in law, complete and utter waste of time. It was absolutely ludicrous. It was doomed to fail. It could not possibly have succeeded in law, but what it did do was got all over the papers right as the jury was going out for deliberations, got all the papers writing about naked photo shoots and did it or didn't it support previous allegations. I think the other reason is that if by some miracle for them they do succeed in this motion, it will be the most powerful tool that they have ever had in 10 plus years of suing in trying to obtain a settlement, because it depends on how wedded Michael Jackson's estate / the companies are to maintaining Michael Jackson's dignity, because clearly the absolute ultimate indignity that you could inflict on somebody is to forcibly take photographs of them naked and then publish those photographs to the wider public. If that were to happen, it would essentially be the biggest, most egregious case of revenge porn that the world has ever seen. If they were to obtain those photographs, and if Michael Jackson's estate / the companies were wedded to the idea of it's just an insult too far, we cannot allow these pictures to come out, then it would be the most powerful weapon they've ever had to try to secure a settlement. And we know that they want a settlement because in legal documents that have been filed in the past few months, they have specifically indicated that they are open to negotiating a settlement, Wade and Jimmy. The estate are absolutely, at the moment, opposed to a settlement. So it's almost certain they will not win. They've tried this a couple of times before. They've lost both times. However, nothing is impossible because remember, these two guys shouldn't even be getting a trial. If the law was being followed properly, they wouldn't even be getting a trial. They had taken this argument to judge after judge and court after court over years and years and been thrown out every time. And they just kept coming back and coming back and coming back and coming back until eventually they found a bench that was politically compromised enough to wave this through. Because in America, you have a system of elected judges. So unfortunately, when you have elected judges, you have judges who are making decisions with their eye on what they think voters want them to do, rather than with their eye on what is right in law and what is fair. So it is possible, albeit unlikely, that they could win. They could win this motion. It's unlikely, but they could win it. And if they win it, I think that part of the reason they're going after these pictures is because it will be a very, very powerful weapon in their quest to obtain a settlement. Next thing is Reed. So, speaking of Reed, in the last couple of weeks, the judge who has taken over the case has banned cameras from the courtroom. So, ever since leaving Neverland, Dan Reed had been following these two guys around and their lawyers and filming all the court hearings. The current judge has at the moment put a stop to that. Obviously, we don't know how long term that's going to be. It could be a temporary decision, it could be a permanent decision. But at the moment, there will be no further filming. Opinions are split as to whether that's good or bad. My own opinion is that that is a good thing. MJ Vibe has reported on Charlie Michaels. Tom Mesereau and the legal team have filed paperwork indicating that they want to complete the deposition of Charlie Michaels. Her deposition began in December 2016, was quite a long deposition and cut off when it wasn't really finished, and then it was never rescheduled. For anyone that's read a lot of these depositions, hers is the one where she's a former female Neverland security guard who was sacked in 1992 because she refused to do shift work. Amid the Geordie Chandler case, she was approached by Hard Copy and received tens of thousands of dollars to do a smear story on Michael Jackson, where she said that she had seen him on an amusement ride with his arm around Wade Robson, and that his hand appeared to be in Wade Robson's lap, and that she'd also seen him and Wade Robson dancing in a mirror, and Michael's hand had been on Wade's crotch. That was the story that she sold for approximately $20,000. She negotiated that through a lawyer. The actual fee was $35,000, but the lawyer kept $15,000. So hers is the deposition where when Wade and Jimmy's lawyers got her in the room, she went on a bit of a tirade and said that she is a former victim of child abuse, and she thinks that victims should go to the police rather than suing for money, and that it's wrong for Wade and Jimmy to have waited decades and then started suing for money, and that they should sue their own mothers instead. However, she does say that she believes that Michael Jackson is a child molester, and she's happy to cooperate. Tom Mesereau has filed legal papers saying that they want to complete Charlie Michaels' deposition. That's the beginning of a long process of further evidence gathering now that they're preparing for a trial. The estate is seeking to delay any civil trial until at least late 2025, and they're saying that they want the case referred to the complex litigation program because of what they call complicated discovery issues. So discovery is the legal phrase for the obtaining of evidence, and that includes the handing over of evidence by both sides that they're going to rely on to the other sides for inspection. One of the complex issues that they want dealt with is that the estate is going to go after all unaired footage from Leaving Neverland. And because Dan Reed and his production company are not American, because they're not US based, the US court system cannot issue subpoenas either for the material or for the witnesses, for the staff that worked there to compel them to testify. So they're going to have to go through some sort of international system, which is part of the complex litigation process that the estate is trying to access, and which they say is going to substantially delay the trial. Reed has been giving interviews to the press saying that the real reason they want a delay is because they don't want the trial to interfere with their biopic. I think that's everything. I think that have I missed anything? Does anyone know of any updates that I've missed?
I'm not aware of any other updates. I think you've just summarized that very well. Just going back to the original point, which was the request from Robson and Safechuck's lawyers trying to uncover the photographs of Michael Jackson's genitalia from 1993. I think that is just an egregious attempt to sully a worldwide jury pool in the court of public opinion as to Michael's innocence or guilt. And I still can't believe that media outlets and the general public that think he's guilty cannot see the very, very simple point that had Jordan Chandler's description of Michael's genitalia matched the photographs, that alone would have been enough to result in charges for Michael Jackson. Yet he was put in front of 2 grand juries that refused to indict, even with those. I believe they used those photographs as evidence. I might be wrong.
No, they didn't. They didn't rely on them.
They didn't
And what they
rely on
actually did was they called Katherine Jackson before the grand jury
Yes.
and questioned her about the fact that the photographs didn't match the description. They said, "Do you have any knowledge that Michael has had plastic surgery to his penis to avoid a match?" So if the photograph had matched the description, then why on earth would they have done that?
Didn't Snedden at some point actively try and not use the photographs?
Yes, exactly right. In NJJ repository, they've done a really good thread on this, which we shared through our Twitter feed, and Snedden actively campaigned against using those photographs, or well, in fact, what it was is Tom Mesereau had a request to have the photographs returned or destroyed, and Snedden basically said that they've remained hidden from the world to this day in a safety deposit box that requires 2 signatures, and that's where they should remain. So even he's saying that they should stay hidden rather than, come out and be used in the 2005 trial.
Thomas Snedden, at the very end of the 2005 trial, filed a motion seeking to introduce the photographs. Now, that was a complete time-wasting, unwinnable motion because they had no description to match them against. So in law, there's certainly an American trial situation, there is a legal concept called authentication. So, for example, the reason that Martin Bashir was the first witness called in the trial was because Snedden wanted to kick off the trial by playing Bashir's documentary. But in a courtroom, you can't just play a documentary. You have to bring in a witness to say, "This is my documentary. I made it, and I am here to authenticate that this is the documentary, not some version of it that the prosecution has spliced, in an embarrassing way or something." So they could not enter Jordan Chandler's description into evidence because Jordan Chandler was refusing to testify against Michael Jackson. He'd moved to New York, told everybody he knew that Michael never touched him, and when he found out the prosecutors were looking for him to testify, he left the country so they couldn't subpoena him. So without Jordan Chandler, there's no description, and with no description, there is absolutely no use in presenting those photographs because there's nothing to compare them against. So Snedden submitted this motion, but it was a motion which was designed for no reason other than to be leaked to the media. So the prosecution was under a gag order, just like the defense, but they were breaching that gag order constantly. Tom Snedden was witnessed briefing journalists in the courthouse. Every motion they were filing, even though they were filing it under seal, it was immediately leaking to the press. So he did file a motion seeking to introduce those photographs into the 2005 trial. However, it was an unwinnable motion and it was quashed by the judge. I think what you might be referring to is Larry Feldman,
That's it.
who was Jordan Chandler's lawyer. He filed a motion seeking to keep those pictures out of court. So he filed a motion where he said, we want one of two things. Either we want a complete do-over of the process, and what that entails is you have to give us the pictures that have already been taken, and then Geordie gives another description, and then you do a second photo shoot, right? I mean, ludicrous. Or we want the original pictures kept out of court. So that is not the action of somebody whose intelligence is that his client's description has matched the photographs. That's not the behavior of a lawyer who thinks that that's what's happened. So Snedden did seek to introduce the pictures, however, in a completely phony, time-wasting way, which was never actually a legal possibility.
The whole issue with requesting these photographs now, it's absolutely awful, and I think you made some good points as to the reasons why. But if they did win this motion somehow, I think it would put the estate in quite a difficult position, because whether preserving Michael's dignity is important to them or not, if they settled as a result of those photos being released, it looks even worse. It looks like they're settling because, and this is how it would be painted to the general public, there's some kind of match somewhere. Some boy somewhere has got a description that matches, and the estate don't want that to come out. Therefore, they are settling now that the photos are out. And that's the way the media, whether that's true or not, that's the way the media would present it, because that's exactly what gets said about Jordan Chandler's description. We know there's no match. We know that if there had been a match, as you said, charges would have been filed. But as far as the general public are concerned, as far as the media report, even in Dan Reed's latest interview just the other day, they are going out there specifically saying the description did match.
I think also as well with them doing this, they just know what an absolute stir it's going to cause in the media. God forbid, if it was ever allowed, people will be creating fake pictures trying to claim that they're legitimate and all sorts, and it's just, the whole thing is just completely nightmarish.
Anika, seeing as we have you here, obviously you started MJ Innocent with Shawnee O'Kane, and I suppose you see a lot of discussion online about things like Leaving Neverland 2 and where it's going and all of those kind of things. What's the latest on all of that? Do you have any information on what fans may have to face moving forward?
From what we understand of Leaving Neverland 2 is that, as has been mentioned, Reed's intention is that the next instalment is out before the trial, and we understand that he would be looking to do a further instalment sort of following the trial, whether or not he is able to film during proceedings. We know that he is looking for fans to interview. We know that fans have been contacted. He hired someone called Brandon Ogborn, who did a podcast himself. Was it Telephone Stories?
Right, yeah.
A podcast sort of examining the allegations against Michael, which was, broadly speaking, supposed to be a neutral look at the allegations. But he hired Brandon to approach fans to try and get fans to participate in Leaving Neverland 2, because he knew that if he approached fans directly himself, he would be refused. So he's hired a third party to be the intermediary in the hopes that it would encourage people to then participate. Brandon did contact me, and I spoke to Brandon, and he was pretty straight up in saying that, look, all I can tell you is what Dan Reed has told me, and that is that he's not trying to misrepresent you or portray you in any negative manner. He just wants to hear your side of the story and why you defend Michael and why you believe he's innocent. I mean, my view on that is I highly doubt that to be the case. I wouldn't trust Dan Reed in terms of what he states his intentions are. I'm certainly not going to participate in anything for Dan Reed, and my view is that fans shouldn't, because Dan Reed is or has been highly embarrassed by the fan community as a whole. I think we did a great job in dismantling pretty much everything he tried to put forward in Leaving Neverland. I think it's fair to say that had the fans not done what the fans done back in 2019, probably things like the musical wouldn't be enjoying the success that they are today. Reed is aware, very much so, that the fans are very knowledgeable when it comes to this case. So his intention has to be to discredit the fan base, because if he can credibly discredit us, then anything that we say just gets looked at as, oh, it's just those crazy Michael Jackson fans. Whereas at the moment, we have been able to put out good information, and the general public seem to be looking at these things a lot more closely. Even if you look online with things like comments under various posts, the tide does seem to be turning.
Yeah.
Do you know of any fans that have been interviewed by Dan Reed?
I don't know. I know there were a couple of fans thinking about it. Whether or not they did it in the end or not, I don't know.
But it's interesting they want to go to fans and not to like the family or lawyers of the 2005 trial, say like Tom Mesereau. It's this ridiculous idea that he thinks he can lure fans into his foolery, only to have everything that they're saying taken out of context. I mean, imagine the editing, and I think he just wants to be able to say, well, before they said that it was one-sided. Well, now I've spoken to both sides, so there you go. It's just the whole thing's so transparent.
On the family and the lawyers, I think he's been given a hard no from them. It's an absolute no.
Okay.
So coming to fans, he does want to say, oh, look, I did try and get the other side of the story, but they refused to talk to me. And I think as far as MJ Innocent is concerned, my understanding is that there will be some sort of disclaimer in Leaving Neverland 2 where it will have something along the lines of representatives of MJ Innocent were contacted but declined to participate. So it looks like it puts it on us.
Yeah. It looks like you've been cornered and didn't know what to say in response. It's the whole. I mean, even the fact that they're attempting to do a part 2 after the initial piece was so discredited and disproven on so many different levels. I mean, in ways that just tear it to pieces. It's testimony in itself that this is all a thing of notoriety.
The thing with doing this part 2, part 3 thing is that there's actually no real need for a part 2, because if you look at it from the perspective of you're putting out a documentary, which is the appeal is supposed to be to the general public. But as far as the general public is concerned, since Leaving Neverland 1 happened, nothing's really happened. There's been a bunch of legal wrangling that your average person really isn't going to care about. The next big thing that will happen will be the actual trial. That's interesting. That's worth doing a documentary on. The only reason to put out some fluff piece before the trial is, in my view, to influence a potential jury. You could just wait for the trial and do your whole piece after that when you have the final verdict and we know what's happened. There's no actual need for this middle thing that he's doing.
It's a good point you make, Anika. It's almost like a big media circle jerk with the whole Leaving Neverland thing. It's interesting that he did an interview recently where he talked about part 2, and he mentioned Channel 4, but he did not mention HBO. It sounds like they're gone, like they're not involved in part 2. But
remember, they're in the middle of a legal thing with the Michael Jackson estate, aren't they? So HBO would be kind of compromised.
That's gone into private mediation. But it's like the media has a very different view of Leaving Neverland than the public does. The media never shuts up about it, but the public didn't watch it for the most part. I mean, the viewing figures were not very high. And the other thing that you see a lot with the media is they're constantly talking about Dan Reed as though the general public know who Dan Reed is. It's this kind of metropolitan elite bubble that exists in the media, where they think that because they know who Dan Reed is, everyone else knows who. Nobody knows who Dan Reed is. The general public don't know who he is. They
Yeah.
don't care about anything that he has to say. But I've never seen a reality TV director. I've never seen someone interviewed so much. You never see any other director of reality TV being interviewed to this extent. It's like every time something happens with Michael Jackson, oh, let's get Dan Reed to write an article about it. Let's see what Dan Reed has to say. Nobody knows who this man is. It's so bizarre. And it is a real interesting window on the very skewed view that the British media has in particular, and how out of touch it is with the real world and with the real public.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, that in itself just proves that this is more about him than anyone. Doing his little tour of interviews as he did when Leaving Neverland was released in 2019. He's getting off on the notoriety of it all, that it's giving him, putting his name suddenly in the mainstream by riding on the back of Michael's name and dragging Michael's name through the mud for as long as he can possibly do it. I feel embarrassed for him almost.
If you think about it, he's done a number of other projects that are nothing to do with Michael, but nothing gets his name out there the way, as soon as he mentions Michael Jackson, he's everywhere suddenly.
Well, it's the same with anyone, isn't it? It's exactly why people just jump on this bandwagon and drag Michael's name through the mud, because you're guaranteed, you sell a story or you do something negative with Michael's name attached to it, suddenly the whole world knows who you are.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for your thoughts on that topic. And especially Charlie Thomson, thank you for that amazing summary of where everything's at right now with that particular trial. That was really, really well done. We're going to change up things now and talk a little bit about the musical. So last episode, we talked about how the musical had premiered in London, and a number of the people on this panel right now were able to go to that. So obviously, MJ the Musical is now playing in London. The premiere itself was fairly star-studded. There was a lot of notable people that went, celebrities, but also, even just within our little Michael Jackson community, there was a lot of well-known fans that went along as well. So I'd love it if you guys could talk to what it was like at that particular night. We've just talked about how Michael's in the news all the time with this trial and Leaving Neverland and all of that kind of stuff. And if somebody were just to have their eye on the media or be watching the news and seeing discussion about Michael in that forum, you'd have a certain opinion. But were things different in that theatre as MJ the Musical was premiering in London? What was the reaction like? Who wants to kick things off?
Yeah, so I was there for the very, very first opening night and for the premiere night. And with the first opening night, it was incredible. I mean, we were kind of down right near the front, whereas in the premiere night, we were up in the balcony predominantly. We meaning the fans. Down in the stalls right up at the front was reserved for all the journalists that had been dogging Michael's name for so many years. The first opening night, I tell you, I've been going to West End musicals since I was a young child, and I have never before seen a musical or a show that has had multiple standing ovations before the final curtain. In fact, a standing ovation even before the first half is wrapped. When I say standing ovation, I mean like you're talking, by no exaggeration, I would say approximately a 60-second standing ovation of thunderous applause. Now, when you count 60 seconds and you're thinking it's a standing ovation and, it's like pretty much halfway through the show, it's a long standing ovation, right? I have never experienced that in my life. The atmosphere, the enthusiasm, the love and the passion for Michael from everyone in the theater, it was just a phenomenal experience. The energy, it was just incredible. It was so exhilarating. And there were fans that had come from all over the world to see that night. There were fans that had traveled from all over Europe. There were fans that had come from Australia. There were fans that had come from all over the States, Tennessee, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Tampa, Florida, New York. It's incredible. Seattle. In fact, one lady from Newark had seen the Broadway show 6 times and had still come to see this show. And it was just incredible. You see, as a Michael fan, I've been on the scene in the community actively for decades. And you're seeing all these fans who I've never seen before. And they are either dressed as Michael from head to toe, or they have Michael t shirts on, young, small children, people of all ages. It was just incredible. As I said, so exhilarating. I was on such a high, such a buzz. The show itself, I have to be honest with you and say that I initially distanced myself from the production and a lot of things around it. I was always happy that it was getting so well received. Not to bring anything negative into it or whatever, but I distanced myself because of what we had initially heard the writer say, kind of jumping on the bandwagon in 2019 on the back of Leaving Neverland. Possibly, I think something like indicating that she thought possibly Michael was guilty or whatever. So straight away, I backed away from it immediately. Like I said, the fact that it was so successful, I was thrilled with that. But I went along. A friend had a spare ticket, and I was invited, and I definitely didn't decline. I wasn't sure how I would feel, especially being a Michael tribute artist. You can be, I guess, a little bit critical of someone's interpretation, but at the same time, appreciating that every interpretation is different and unique in their own way, and you've got to kind of stop yourself looking from you know, the specifics and every tiny kind of little detail. But I really enjoyed it. At the end of the day, everyone was there celebrating Michael's legacy, his genius, his artistry. I will say two things that made me kind of a bit. I felt like the use of Michael and the pills, the medication, it could have been overused, to my knowledge, and I could be wrong about this, especially at that particular time during the dangerous rehearsals. I'm not aware that Michael was really that heavily involved with the medication. Had this been set somewhere in 2001, I would have said, okay, yeah, sure, yeah. But perhaps that was a way to give public Joe, to really help them empathize with Michael that much more in terms of his struggle, both with his pain physically from the burns and so on and so forth, and with what he'd been going through, everything he had endured at the hands of the media already by that time. And then the other thing is, and I know everyone has their own opinion about this, but switch off for anyone who hasn't seen the musical because I don't want to ruin it. Spoiler coming right now. But to have made Joe literally a monster, I mean, more than anything, I'm just kind of thinking, like, how do the family feel about that? And I know as well for a fact that the family had already interjected and called for. I mean, the way it is now is after the family had demanded that certain changes be made, and that specifically with Joe and the brothers and Catherine, things be toned down a lot. So yeah, look, we know Michael had a hard time at the hand of Joe. We also know that Michael had his understanding of why Joe was the way he was. Joe grew up 1930s Alabama, a young black boy raised with an iron fist himself. Doesn't justify, the way Michael suffered what he endured that affected him in his personality, his life. Yeah, I just felt like kind of, yeah, maybe that was a little bit harsh, but everything else, it was great. I'm looking around the theater when everyone's on their feet in the finale, standing ovation, just thinking, wow, like, I can only hope Michael is somehow aware of this, can see this. It's incredible when you think what started off as a young boy from Gary, Indiana, created this. It's just phenomenal. It was really incredible.
So I've seen the show twice now as well. I didn't go on the first night it opened, but I went on the first weekend. The response from the audience was phenomenal. I was sitting towards the front in the stalls that particular night, and I did keep looking around just to see how people were reacting, because I think by the night I went, there were probably fewer hardcore fans and maybe more general public as well. And everyone was bopping away in their seats. People were on their feet multiple times through the show. You could see people visibly moved at certain parts as well. So I think the show did a really good job with humanizing Michael and kind of bringing his character to life a little bit,
Yeah.
rather than some of the caricature you get of who Michael was. And I think sometimes even when fans try to explain who Michael was, you get oh, he was amazing, he was a humanitarian, he was so lovely, but it's not real to people. Whereas I think this quite nicely brought together the different elements of his character and brought it to life for people who may not have that same understanding of who Michael was as we do.
Right.
And I also was at the press night. Yeah, as Danny said, we were sitting up in the heavens for that one. But again, I was looking around a lot to try and see how people were reacting, and people were on their feet, people were dancing, people were singing along. You know, the cheers were very loud, which makes the headlines from the next morning that much more infuriating, because it didn't reflect what was actually happening in the theatre. You know, do I have some issues with the show? 100%. But when you're in the theatre and when you're seeing people's reaction to it, you would expect for that to be reflected in the reviews. That's what the reviewers are supposed to do. Being in that theatre, you know, I've read some of these reviews and I thought, I bet you were the one dancing the most that night, but here we go. This is what you've written and this is what you're presenting to the world. Yeah, it doesn't address the allegations, but it was never intended to. I think the estate have been pretty clear that actually the biopic will address the allegations, and that's probably the correct forum in which to do that. I don't think a theatre production is really the right place to discuss something so serious.
But it wasn't within that timeline anyway, was it? Because the furthest it took us was 1992, you know?
Yeah, but if you read what reviewers are saying, they're saying that that's very convenient because they did jump from different time, you know, they did the past, so they could have potentially brought in other timeframes of Michael's life, but they made that choice not to include past a certain point.
I think that's a really good point, Anika, that you make. I hadn't thought of it that way before, but it's definitely possible that the estate are playing the long game with this musical, and with the biopic, that's going to come out and address the allegations, and with the conclusion of the trial around Wade and James, hopefully in both of those instances, the estate is going to have the final say. This musical hopefully will have a life well beyond that. Perhaps, 10 years from now, this musical will still be there. People going to see it, celebrating his music, hopefully long after the dust has settled on these allegations.
Exactly. And that's what you'd hope for something like this. I was a little bit disappointed that the estate didn't do anything. You know, press night, it's a big deal, especially for people within the fan community. You know, there are fans out there who desperately want to see the show, who may not be able to afford it, or, you know, theatre is pretty expensive in this day and age. And I thought it would have been a nice gesture, given what the fans do, if they could have run a competition and said, hey, look, here's 5 tickets, here's a competition, inviting some fans along or something like that. Just a little bit of, I guess, appreciation or some sort of acknowledgement for the fan community would have been nice, I thought. So I was a little bit disappointed that there was nothing in that vein from the estate, but I guess it is what it is.
I think that's a really fair comment, especially what, the fan community had done the last 5 years, as you say, with all the hard work and the investigative work regarding the allegations and so on. Whatever keeps the revenue coming in for them, I guess. I will say in the second night, not to point out the one negative. Sorry, the second night, the second time I saw it, so the premiere night was talking to Charlie about this. Again, switch off for anyone who hasn't seen it. Spoiler coming. Black or white when it's in the finale of the show, and the trap door didn't work. And I was talking to Charlie about it, and he was like, "You couldn't make it up, could you? Especially since so much of the show was about, this trap door being a whole big thing and the health and safety concerns of it all, and it failed, but it didn't take anything away from the show."
Charlie, let's bring you in. You were there as well watching this, weren't you? Which particular nights were you there for?
So, as you know, I saw it on Broadway first. I went to New York in 2022 and saw it on Broadway. And much as I am inclined to be skeptical of anything that the estate has a hand in, I couldn't deny the brilliance of the show. What a great piece of work it is. I mean, there are issues with it, of course. I mean, there are chronological issues in terms of it just getting stuff wrong. Well, not getting, I mean, it's clearly deliberate, but as Danny said, the pill popping in 1992, there's just no basis for that. There's a part of the show where they kind of blame Joe for Michael taking drugs, which is just completely from the moon. I don't even know where that came from. The portrayal of the family is not good. However, as an overall piece of work, it is a huge success. And of course, on Broadway, it got nominated for 10, I think, Tony Awards and won 4 of them. A massive success, and has been by far the most successful show on Broadway since the pandemic. Now, in the same year, before I went to Broadway, and this is part of the reason that I went to Broadway to see it, I went to a show called Jerusalem. As anyone who knows me knows, that I'm a huge theatre buff, huge theatre fan. I do probably 3 or 4 shows a month. And I went to see a show called Jerusalem in London, and I was sat behind a group of British theatre industry people who were having a discussion right in front of me about how everyone in UK theatre is flying out to Broadway to see MJ because it's the greatest musical of the last 10 years, but it's well known in industry circles that a decision has been taken not to bring it to London because they know that if they bring it to London, the press will do everything they can to sabotage it, to destroy it. So I was absolutely shocked when the UK transfer was announced. So I didn't go on the first night, the first performance. So just to clarify, so that people are referring to different things as opening night. So just for anyone that's not kind of in the know, musicals and other performances in London tend to open with what they call previews. So they do a few weeks of previews where the show is on and it's in front of audiences, but the tickets are slightly cheaper. And it's because it's in a kind of a limbo land between rehearsal and the official opening night. And during the previews, they're tinkering with the show. That thing's not quite working. This person's standing in the other person's way, that kind of thing. They're fixing the show during the previews. And then they have what's called press night / opening night, the kind of red carpet gala night, which is referred to as opening night, but the show has actually been playing for several weeks. So a lot of fans went on opening night, as in the first performance, the first preview performance. And in fact, a lot of people assumed that I got quite a few text messages from people saying, "What pub are you in? Shall we have a drink before the show?" I was like, "I'm not going." So by a strange series of coincidences and fortunate events, which are just too convoluted to go into, I ended up seeing the show 3 times in a week in the week of press night. So on the Monday, I went on the Monday, and we saw actually Miles Frost's stand-in. So Monday nights, for anyone that's thinking of booking, Monday nights are Miles Frost's night off. So if you want to see Miles Frost, don't go on a Monday. I went on the Monday, we saw the stand-in. I went on the Wednesday, press night, and then I went on the Saturday night as well. The show is basically a carbon copy of the American show, albeit with a different cast, apart from Miles Frost, who's been imported for this. I cannot put my finger on it. I can't really tell you what it is, but something about it is not quite living up to the Broadway production, and I just don't know what it is. I think part of it is that the theatre is bigger. It's a much bigger theatre in London. It's not got that much bigger capacity. It's only about 20% bigger capacity, but it is a much bigger space. And the Broadway theatre felt much more intimate. The Neil Simon Theatre. The Prince Edward Theatre is one of the biggest theatres in the West End. And that really speaks to, just to go off on a slight tangent, that really speaks to the enormous popularity of this show. I may have mentioned this before. The last musical that was in the Prince Edward Theatre was last year, and it was called Ain't Too Proud. It was the Temptations musical, and I was at press night for that. And that musical ended up closing early. It was booked in for about 7 or 8 months, and it ended up closing early because it was not selling enough tickets to cover its bills. MJ was announced for a 3-month run, a limited, I think 3.5-month run, and it sold so many tickets on pre-order that it had to triple its run before it had even opened. They doubled the run, and then they added another 3 months on top. So it was supposed to finish in June, and now it's booking all the way to December. An extraordinary achievement for any show in any theatre, but for that theatre in particular, where the last musical ended up having to close, an extraordinary feat. And the Temptations only kept going that long with discount tickets through services like TKTS Booth and Today Tix and things like that. MJ is sold out every single night. I don't think there's been a single night since it opened in London that it hasn't been a complete sellout. And there are no discount tickets available anywhere apart from the raffle, which most shows do to make sure that people who are of limited means have a chance of getting in. So this show has been extraordinarily popular in terms of ticket sales at full price in the biggest theatre, or one of the biggest theatres in the West. I mean, if you walk 2 minutes up the road to the Apollo Theatre on Shaftesbury Avenue, the Prince Edward is literally twice as big. So, and Jerusalem, that's where Jerusalem was in the Apollo, and that was regarded as a gigantic hit because it sold out about 12 weeks at the Apollo. MJ has sold, I mean, it's selling like hotcakes. It's just a gigantic success. So having seen it 3 times in a week, and 2 of those times were nights when you would not expect it to be loaded with fans. So one of them was press night, and we know that they put press night on sale to fans and marketed it through their official fan mailing list. So you knew you were going to get a big contingent of MJ fans on press night. But on the Monday and the Saturday as well, so I've seen it 3 times. Every time I've seen it, there have been multiple standing ovations. People are leaping out of their seats to give these standing ovations. I have to concur with Danny and Anika. I go to the theatre a lot. I have never seen an audience reaction to any show that compares to the reaction that MJ is getting on nights when it is not packed with fans. These are just members of the public who've bought tickets. You know, these are not people who are showing up with MJ hats and MJ tattoos and wearing MJ jackets and all that stuff. This is just a theatre which is packed every night with around 2,000 members of the public who are not card-carrying members of the MJ fan club, and they are going berserk for this show. People are going crackers. If I had one slight grievance, it would have to be some of the audience behavior is really not very good. And I've experienced that on 2 of the occasions that I've been. The audiences are a bit unruly and not really being courteous or respectful or behaving you would expect the way people to behave in a theatre. They're sort of treating it almost like a concert, and it's slightly disruptive.
Yeah, lack of theatre etiquette.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. And some of the fans showed their asses on press night. I have to say they really did embarrass themselves, and the ushers were having to intervene. There were people getting their phones out and filming, you know, people that were standing up in front of the people behind them and blocking their view. It was just a bit like, oh, come on, guys. You know, I mean, now, all that being said, there is something we need to address, and that is the press. And in my opinion, they shouldn't have even had a press night. When your show is so successful that you've tripled your run before you've even opened, in one of the biggest theatres in London. What do you need a press night for?
Yeah.
And they must have known that the press was going to maul it. And I say that because I was privy to the conversation at Jerusalem where all these theatre industry folk were talking about it. They were saying it's not coming to London because the press will try to destroy it. Now, Anika mentioned something when she was talking. She said it was really jarring and disappointing to experience the hugely positive reaction on press night and then see the headlines that came out the next morning. Well, those headlines may have come out in print the next morning. I didn't stick around after the show. I went from the theatre to the tube. I went 6 stops on the tube and got on a train home. And by the time I sat my ass in the chair on that train home, the first reviews were already out. It must have been less than 20 minutes since curtain came down on press night, and there were people publishing reviews. And let me tell you, as somebody who has worked in newspapers for 15 years, that is not possible. It is not possible for those reviews. When I read them, it is not possible that those reviews were written and edited and put online in the 20 minutes between curtain coming down and those reviews appearing on the website. It is impossible. And the reviews had clearly been written, at least in spirit, before they ever saw the show. They were all following a narrative, not only ignoring the audience reaction, as Anika said, but actually just bullshitting about the content of the show as well. There was a theme across all of the reviews that came out. And bear in mind, this is a 5-star, 10 Tony Award nominated musical that won 4 Tony Awards, right? This is a musical which has been embraced and celebrated by the theatre community. And that's only the Tony Awards. It won other awards as well. These reviews across the board, 1 star, 2 star, they were all saying the same thing, which is it's a whitewash that paints over all of the demons in Michael Jackson's life and fails to address the negativity. And you're sort of looking at it going, like, only with Michael Jackson and the British press could you have a situation where a musical opens in the West End portraying Michael Jackson as like a sleep-deprived, paranoid, pill-popping, micromanaging control freak suffering from flashbacks to an abusive childhood. And then they all write reviews saying, this whitewash show fails to address Michael's demons. It's like, what show were you watching? What show were you watching? The reviews are just full of bullshit. And I reiterate, as somebody who has worked in newspapers for 15 years, it is not possible that those reviews were written after the curtain came down on the show. It's impossible. Absolutely impossible. And you've seen it. What's happened since then is you've just had, on top of the reviews, you've had an absolute deluge of articles and radio pieces and TV pieces saying, should there be a musical? Should it be cancelled? Is it insensitive? Are we celebrating a paedophile? Everything that the people at Jerusalem were talking about when I overheard that industry conversation, everything that they said is coming true, even down to the fact that there were a couple of days this week where Miles was ill. He got the flu and he couldn't perform, and they had to cancel a couple of performances. This is not an uncommon occurrence in the West End. And again, I say this as somebody who goes to 3-4 shows a month. This is not an uncommon occurrence. People get sick and shows have to be cancelled. Only when it's a Michael Jackson musical does this become a national news story. National newspapers running stories saying MJ show thrown into chaos with performances cancelled. It's pathetic. It's just absolutely pathetic. But they're failing. They are failing because the show has tripled its run before it even opened. It is so popular. And if you go on any night, it seems, and I've been watching the social media reaction to the show as well, if you go on any night, there are people leaping to their feet for multiple standing ovations every night. So once again, it demonstrates how out of touch our national media is with public sentiment, and how weak and impotent and deflated and depleted it is. It is just not having an impact. It's just not having an impact. So it's almost like they're sort of screaming into a void. They're furious, they're stamping their feet and balling their fists and saying, the plebs aren't thinking what we tell them to think anymore. And unless they have a very serious rethink of their attitude towards what they do and towards their audience, all they're doing is running towards their own deaths, sprinting towards their own demise. So it was infuriating and disappointing and very reminiscent for me of 2006 World Music Awards experience, the enormous dissonance between what was happening in the theatre and what was being said in the reviews. But the difference is they are not shaping public opinion in the way that they were in 2006. In 2006, that everybody was saying, oh, Michael Jackson got booed off last night at the World Music Awards. Today, people are just going out and buying tickets. And so I think that that is heartening.
It does make you wonder, though. You said that, it shows how out of touch the press is. But, the press is not made up of one or two people. The press is made up of, hundreds of people, thousands probably. And they can't all be blind to what's going on. They can't all fail to see that the tide is turning or that public opinion is shifting. So why are they not responding in kind? Why are they not?
There's a constant agenda, isn't there, to drag Michael's name through the mud. I mean, I remember in 2005 when the trial started, I did an interview at BBC Radio, and on the other end of the line was, I think it was The Sun, Scotland, and the editor openly and shamelessly admitted that he absolutely will not allow any article to go out in print without Wacko Jacko attached to anything where otherwise the name Michael Jackson would have been. And Charlie, I remember you saying before that you had spoken to someone, overheard someone somewhere in some publication house say something of a similar narrative.
But this was 20 years ago now. A lot of the people that were there back then won't still be there now. And then it does make you wonder sometimes, what's the reason that they continue to push some of these things so hard? The musical is selling out, regardless of all the stuff that's in the, regardless of Leaving Neverland, regardless of the constant narrative of, is Michael Jackson a paedophile? Should we be celebrating him? Like you said, all these news stories, yet the musical is sold out. So what is the push for these negative headlines? And you do start kind of wondering, are some of these conspiracy theories so far off the mark? Or
yeah.
Well,
it just makes you wonder.
I think there's two elements to it. So the first thing is newspapers are absolutely dying. So very, very few people buy newspapers today. But what the research tells us in the newspaper industry is that the people who do go out and buy newspapers, as a broad rule, are over 65 and quite affluent and right-wing. That's what the data consistently tells us. Older, white, right-wing, affluent. What you have is a shrinking newspaper industry who are all competing for the same audience. They're all aiming their output at a same type of person, but also that audience is dying. The audience is just dying out. And so the audience is shrinking and shrinking. And there's this kind of hysterical jerk to the right where everybody is sort of competing to out right-wing each other for that dying, shrinking audience. It's like a bear pit. Everybody's just clawing each other's eyes out to try and get that pound from that old person, that old right-wing person that's going to go out and buy their newspaper. As I say, not exclusively. It's just that that's what the data tells us as a general rule. And so the newspapers, generally speaking, are producing information which they are targeting at their readers. With a newspaper like The Guardian, for example, which is not part of that downward spiral, what they are doing, though, similarly, is they are targeting content at the type of people who they think read their newspaper, which in the Guardian's case, for instance, is a very right-on person who probably is very Me Too and very social justice. So they're aiming their content at people who are believe all victims, blah, blah, blah. The other thing about it is that it's institutional. So, just to give a sort of a slightly irrelevant but comparable situation, I used to work for a newspaper which was involved in a dispute. We had a terrible, terrible relationship with a particular police force, and I could never understand, like, why do they hate us so much? Why does this police force just absolutely hate us? And it turned out it was because, like, 20 years earlier, a guy I know had run an investigation which had caused enormous embarrassment to this police force and had resulted in several police officers facing prosecution. And from that point on, that police force just had it in for our newspaper. They were like, right, that's it. We never do anything for them. If they want an interview, they don't get it. If they want to come to the press conference, they don't get in. If they want to come for a ride around, we say no. All the other newspapers can come, but they cannot come. So at the time that I joined that newspaper, there was nobody in that police press office who had been there at the time of the initial incident that caused the rift. But it was an institutional thing. It was an environmental thing. You joined that police press office, and part of your training, part of the instructions that were given to you were, by the way, we don't do anything for that newspaper. If they ring in, just fuck them, right? So, and it's the same, I think, with attitudes towards Michael. When Michael became this huge phenomenon in the early 1980s, you have to remember this is only 20 years after segregation was lifted. This is less than 20 years after Martin Luther King was assassinated. There will be people in every newsroom who were racist, who were pro-segregation, who were pro-Jim Crow, who were anti-integration, anti-Martin Luther King, anti-civil rights, anti-black. There would have been people all over these newsrooms everywhere that harbored those attitudes. The Sun in the 1980s was edited by a man who proudly boasted that he aimed his newspaper at racists. He aimed his newspaper at queer-bashing racists. He was proud of that. He said, my audience are fascists. Right? That was what the editor of The Sun said in the 1980s. This is the newspaper that coined the phrase wacko jacko. So there's no question that in the beginning it was racially motivated. No question. Is it racially motivated now? I think it's baked in. I think that what has happened is there's been a huge turnover of staff over the years, but the culture of those newspapers has persisted. We don't like Jackson. That it's always been the culture. And so I think it just gets passed down from generation to generation, and people don't necessarily know why they're doing it. And as I say, it's sort of emblematic of how out of touch they are. They are completely out of touch now on so many issues, on political issues, on Gaza, for example. You see the way that they're attacking the Gaza protesters.
Yeah.
Poll after poll after poll shows that the overwhelming majority of the British public are pro-Palestine and pro-ceasefire.
Yeah.
However, the demographic that these newspapers are targeted at, the ABC1 white male right-wing voter who's affluent, they are not going to be pro-Palestine. They're going to be pro-Brexit, pro-Tory, anti-anybody with brown skin, essentially, as a general rule. Obviously not speaking to everybody, but as a general rule. So you've got newspapers which are out of step with the wider public, but are targeting their material at a particular audience that they think will pay for what they do. So anyway, that's a kind of a bit of a long-winded answer. But anyway, I think that's what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really interesting.
It's like it's the done thing. Oh, this is just how we do things. Like it's fashionable, like it's the thing to do. And yeah, Charlie,
But it
everything
isn't
you
just
have
the
said.
newspapers. It isn't just the newspapers that are
It's the
doing this.
it's the media entity generally. As Charlie said, it's just been baked in through the years. And there are people that are probably bigoted that have spent so many decades reading this kind of narrative, this kind of junk in these particular publications that don't realize that the things they say are bigoted. It's someone I'm close to, and sometimes they say things that are bigoted, and they're like, no, it's not. I'm like, yes, it is, because they've had their heads buried in the likes of the Sun newspaper for decades. So it's like, it's, as Charlie says, it's just been baked in.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is a bit of a double-sided coin, though. Like, I agree with everything that you guys have said, but I also think too that Michael himself, when he was alive, and now the estate, haven't done an overly good job of putting out to the public a one-stop shop book or documentary or something that addresses the allegations, so the average Joe in the public can understand how they are based on nothing. Where do you point somebody to? Like I've said before on the show, I'm a school teacher, and whenever Michael Jackson's name comes up in the classroom, there's always a kid that asks, was he a pedophile? Like, did he do that? There is not something I can point that person to say, go read this or go watch this documentary. It'll explain everything to you that you'll need to know about why that's false. So I do agree with everything you guys are saying. It's just the problem is that there's no answer to the question that you can point somebody to without them having to go trawling through the internet, looking at different websites to get bits and pieces of the whole story to make up their mind.
Yeah, yeah. Or, the little Amazon Prime Video Square One shout out, is a good starting ground.
It's a good starting ground, but it only addresses one set of the three major allegations
Yeah.
that have taken place.
Well, this is what Taj is hoping to achieve with the docuseries, isn't it? Like a place that can be, once and for all. There's one place you can go where it can all be dissected, explained with factual information.
Agree. Now, before we move on to our final topic, which is your story, Danny, we've got to mention that Charlie, you didn't go to this musical alone, did you? You went with somebody.
Well, I went with different people each time I went.
Yeah, but you know what I'm talking about. We've seen the photo. You went.
Yes,
you went with Tom Mesereau.
I know where we're going with this.
Yeah, I went.
How did that come to be? And I want to know what that was like. What was Tom's reaction to the musical as well?
Well, I've known Tom for over 10 years now, and his family. So Tom and his family were on holiday together in London, just having a vacation. So they just sent me some messages and said, hey, let's get together. So I spent a couple of days with Tom and his family. And one of the things we did was went to see MJ on the Monday night. Now, Tom had already seen it on Broadway anyway, so it wasn't like the show was new to him. But he very much enjoyed it, and he was clapping along and tapping his foot. He got recognized on the way into the theater. There were a couple of fans. Only one guy was bold enough to come over and ask him for a picture. Though it was funny, actually. There was two women there. Their conversation was almost verbatim the intro to Privacy. They were stood there, and one of them had got their phone out and obviously Googled Tom Mesereau. And she was going, that's him. And her friend was going, that's not him. You're deluded. No, she was going, it's him. But, yeah, they couldn't decide whether it was him or not, so they didn't come over. One guy came over and asked for a picture. But yeah, he very much enjoyed it. I don't know what more I can say, really. He enjoyed it.
Amazing.
That's so cool. So cool.
So cool.
All right, Danny, the next section, we want to talk all about your fan story. And the reason, we've got you on as well is because you did a phenomenal job on This Morning just a few days ago when you went on there as well as a guest to debate an interesting individual, shall we say, about and I'm sure we'll get to him in a little bit. Yeah. But you did an outstanding job defending Michael and discussing the truth in connection with this musical. So well done. For anyone who hasn't seen that, I don't think it's available on YouTube anymore. We did share a bootleg style copy of it on our Twitter. If people want to go back and see that, we might even just pin it as we release this episode so you can easily find it. Or even better, we'll put it in our show notes. But again, Danny, well done. It was a phenomenal watch. You did a great job.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm still trying to find out from two of the producers why it was initially put up on YouTube and various other social media platforms and then removed. So they're going to get back to me on Monday. I don't know why they removed it, but they did. And also, I have to say a big thank you to Charlie as well, because Michael, of course, is in my heart 24/7, but I've been particularly focused on everything with Palestine as I had been researching the conflict for many years now. So I've been kind of really involved with that. So I was like, okay, I need to get my head like back here and where are we at? And so Charlie gave me some very helpful and inspiring talks and so on. And I have to say, on my first appearance on This Morning a few years back, of course, we were all in the mix of it. It was, 24/7. Every minute, every hour was researching this and getting the facts. My entire drive to these studios, I had been watching two Razor Fist videos on repeat, which I had done some months before. But also, I was listening to points that Charlie had made. So, as ever, the knowledge was just in depth and brilliant. And so I was in such a dark place in my head because I was just thinking, like, what kind of world do we live in where someone can endure all Michael had endured, that he had suffered and been subjected to that level of cruelty,
Mhm.
been completely exonerated, proven innocent. Like it's not a case of, oh, he was cleared, proven innocent, right? And then, you know, 2009, he's kind of getting back up. He's going to do his thing. He's coming back out into the world again with This Is It. And boom, he passes away, right? But the world celebrates his life. It celebrates his life. And then here we are all these years later. And this is just allowed to happen, and I was so frustrated because I wanted to be able to have a platform where I could talk and fight back on Michael's behalf and amplify the truth, educate people, hopefully the general public, with facts. I had been emailing various people. I had been in touch with people over the years because during 2005, I was on various television news shows in the UK when it used to run ITV News 24, Sky News, BBC, whole bunch of different news channels. And so I was kind of getting my old contacts back up, and eventually they had gotten in touch with me This Morning at ITV. I was really pleased that I was going to have a platform because I know, Gemma, you asked me on a text, like, do I get nervous when I go on live television? And the answer is absolutely no. Like, I don't give a damn. I just don't care. It's just like I'm just thinking, this is for Michael. This is a human being. As I said, it's not just that it's about Michael. It's standing up for anyone who is a victim of such injustice. It's just so appalling, so unfair, so unjust. And so I went like guns a blazing, ready and raring to go. But I was just really giving Charlie such credit as he deserves, because, as you all know, Charlie's eloquence and his knowledge is just so beautiful and inspiring, and has really led the way with the allegations so much in being a voice to amplify the truth to many who perhaps were none the wiser. And so, yeah, I've been really gearing myself up. But going back to 2019, some people are aware of this, but I'll mention it anyway. And I've spoken about this with Taj. Now, the deal was I was only allowed to appear on the show. Now, this goes back to what we were previously discussing in regard to the media had this whole thing about Michael. Why is it? What is it? What's going on? Why do you think it is? Is there some kind of conspiracy? You know, the deal was I could appear under the condition that I agreed to dress up as Michael from head to toe in wig, full stage makeup, and costume. Right now, I had hands down declined this. I had absolutely refused. And then I had said to them, I don't see how me dressed as Michael Jackson is gonna make anything I have to say any more clear than if I went appearing as myself. Oh, well, I have to talk to my producer about this. They put the phone down. They call me back later. Yeah, sorry. Hands down, only way you're coming on the show is if you're dressed up. So I just said, okay, no problem, that's fine. So I just went along with it. I thought, I have to play them at their own game. And then I was thinking, okay, how do I find a way around this? Because, the thing is with people in television, they have this deluded idea of superiority, right? That people who are not involved in entertainment or the entertainment industry or television are somehow beneath them. They're nothing but peasants. Therefore, we should all be intimidated by them and do exactly as they say. Right now, I had spoken to a friend. He said, "Listen, there is no way that you can appear on that show dressed up, not even for one moment." He said, number one, it will be for you as a Michael tribute artist, career suicide. He said, number two, he said, you don't know who they've got as a guest sitting next to you. They could have a legitimate sex abuse victim, a survivor sitting next to you. How offensive would that look? And I said, yep, absolutely, you're right. Yep, don't worry. I'm going to tell him I'm all up for it. I'm game, and I'm going to go in there, and I'll play them at their own game. So I went in, took the wig, the costumes and stuff, and was all like, yeah, like I was really going to do it. And then I went into the hair and makeup room, and I just said, hey, where are the toilets at? And they directed me to the toilets, and so I went there, and I spent a considerate amount of long time in the toilets, like I just had a really hot curry the night before or something. And I stayed in there, and I came out in good time, and I had timed it so that if they had got pissed at me enough that they had wanted to replace me with someone else, well, then they couldn't do that. Number one, they wouldn't be able to find anyone in time. Number two, if they did, there's no way that they'd be able to get them to the studios in time, particularly with the rush hour traffic, by which time they'd be left with no choice but to put me on the couch. So I'm kind of sitting there and, body language, all confident and so on and so forth. And the one of the researchers comes along and says, "Oh, Danny, the wig, what happened? Like the makeup, the costume." "Oh, yeah. I was thinking about that. Yeah, ain't doing it." And he said, what?" I said, "I ain't doing it." "Oh, okay. Well, I'm gonna have to talk to my producer. I'm not sure they'll be happy about that." So they come back. 2 minutes later, there's two of them standing there. "Oh, well, couldn't you just pop the wig on?" And I said, "Let me ask you something. I don't know who is sitting next to me, but are you asking them to dress up too?" I said, "No." I said, "Okay, then I'd like to be treated equally. If they ain't dressing up, then I ain't dressing up." And then I said again, as I said to the person on the phone, I don't see how I'll be able to get my point across any clearer dressed up as Michael Jackson than if I appear as myself. Well, what about the jacket? Couldn't you just put the jacket on? I said, "I'm not being funny. Have you seen how beaten up this jacket is?" "Yeah, but you could kind of draw attention to it and like make a joke out of it on the air." And I said, "Nah, I ain't doing it." And then he said, "Oh, well, I mean, we wouldn't want you to feel uncomfortable or anything." And I said, "Oh, well, that's good, 'cause I ain't doing it." And then they said, "Oh, okay, well, we're live in three." So if you see the 2019 interview, that got really well received. And I mean, if you imagine that exactly as it was, except I was dressed from head to toe in wig and makeup, it was just their attempt to completely dilute anything factual that I had to say about Michael. It was their way of creating a wall between me and the general public, that no matter what came out of my mouth, it couldn't be trusted because, yeah, look at him, look, he's a nut job, isn't he? Look at him, he's obsessed, like, do you know what I mean? So they were trying to head the same way this time as well. I mean, I think they remembered from last time because I was certain they weren't going to have me on the show again. So I was surprised when they called me. The producer had said, "Oh, I guess it's not really realistic for you to come on completely dressed up as Michael Jackson, is it?" And I just said, "No, it's not." And then he said, "Oh, well, perhaps you could bring a jacket in, or a jacket or two. What's that one you made and designed for Michael?" Like, I said, "Yeah, I've got a replica of that, but it's really beaten up and there's like mold on it and stuff." And I said, "Oh, okay, we'll bring a few in." And I went along with it. Yeah, we literally got to set, and I went as far as putting the jacket on and going, "Oh God, you know what? I'm not being funny. It's wet from my show the other night. It's still got sweat. Oh, it's really smelly. Now forget it. I'm not. I'm so." And I knew I was going to play it the whole time. But yeah, and so but again, they weren't asking the other guy to dress up or anything. So it's just, I don't
Which
know.
is funny because he dressed up
Come
in
Like
what
Michael
appeared to
Jackson.
be come together outfit, as
I
Anika
know.
pointed out on
He was
Twitter.
he was dressed more as Michael than I was. So yeah, but yeah, and
Michael wore it better. I have to say that.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, the socks go under the trousers.
Initially, I thought he was a fan because they started off asking him what he thought of the music, and he said it was great. And he's sitting there with his black pants and white socks hitched up, sort of thing.
Right,
And then,
right.
then it
He
went
looked like he'd just
south.
come off a long flight.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
I just,
boy.
yeah, I have to say, like, looking back, I'm frustrated with myself because, I was on 2 hours sleep. The night before that, I had 4 hours. I'd just come off 3 consecutive shows, and I was not as sharp, witty, and focused as I could have been. So, I'm glad that people appreciate it. I just feel a little bit frustrated at myself.
No, you shouldn't be. I felt like, you just were so composed and so calm and level-headed and got those points across really, really well. I think you did a phenomenal job. I would like to zoom back a little bit because in preparation for this conversation, I wanted to do a little bit of research on who you were and your story within the fan community. And a couple of days ago, Charlie Carter sent a message to our group chat in preparation for this episode saying, "You've got to watch a particular documentary that came out, I think about, 15 years ago or something at this point." Now, this documentary, and I've got to apologize for the title of it to our audience. It's called Wacko About Jacko, and we know how Michael felt about that term, so we don't condone that, but nevertheless, that's what the documentary is called. This documentary is a great starting point to understand your fandom, I think, within the early 2000s. And Anika, you're also
my lunacy.
No, I'm not going to say that. Hey, we were all like that once.
Can
But
I just
Anika,
make
you're
a
all
quick point on
yes,
that
please.
title?
Yes, I was going to do the same.
Yeah, so the lady, I guess the director or whatever of that documentary, a lady called Lucy, she was lovely, and Danny and I both stayed in touch with her for many years afterwards. One of the things that we had said to her was that certain words we didn't want used at all in the documentary if we were going to agree to take part. Obviously, two of those words were wacko and jacko. When we first took part, she assured us that would be the case. What then happened is when it came to final editing and all of that kind of stuff, and the show was going to air, Channel 4, ironically, who aired it, took it out of her hands. And I remember her calling me to apologise in advance to say, "Look, I'm really sorry. This wasn't down to me, and I know what we had agreed, but this is what's going to happen." So she did pre-warn us, but there was nothing we could do. How far that's true or not, we'll never know, but I feel like it was just knowing her.
Yeah, according to her, I mean, she had told us that she had fought to not have that title.
Mm.
I think Anika and I, as I remember, were unrealistically pushing for Michael Jackson's Army of Love.
Yeah, yeah, that was never going to happen, that one. But look, we'll get to this as we progress through our chat because we want to sort of go chronologically here. But I just feel it's so amazing how far you've come, I guess, as being from when we think about those early 2000s, that time period, and when we were all young fans and when we were all wearing white socks to school or whatever, and just being a super mega fan like that, to the point where you're now on national live television defending Michael in such a level-headed, calm and professional manner. It is incredible, the journey you've come on. So for those of you who don't know, and in a sec we'll go back to sort of your early life and then progress from there, but for listeners who don't know, this documentary is definitely worth a watch. We're going to link to it in our show notes. And it's sort of just to briefly discuss the premise. It covers the story of 4 fans at a particular point in time. Danny, you're one of the fans. Anika, you're another one of the fans. Navi, the Michael Jackson impersonator, is the third one. And then there's a fourth guy. I can't really remember his name right now.
Emmanuel?
But
Yeah.
Emmanuel, that's it. And he's not, and it's odd that he's actually in it, in my opinion, to start with, because he's not really connected to the main story. The story is that Anika is putting together a tribute type celebration performance to Michael Jackson in the early 2000s, and that you're involved in that because you're going to perform as well as one of the people there. And so was Navi. He was going to be a performer there, but then bailed when he found out that he wasn't going to be the person performing Billie Jean. And then after that night happens, you guys go on essentially a road trip to the US to be there for Michael Jackson's trial. You go to Neverland. It is an absolutely fascinating, gripping watch. And I had never seen it before. And Charlie said, you've got to watch this if you want to understand, that point in time for Danny. And I love it. And I just really implore our audience as well, if you haven't seen it, to check it out as well. You guys are probably cringing at me telling people to go and watch that.
I really am. I'm going, if you don't want to link it, that's fine too.
You know what? I think
Oh, well.
one of the things I'm most proud of is the reviews it had gotten on imdb.com are just so hilarious. Like based purely on my foul mouth and my language.
I was just about to say, Danny, I watched some of it today in preparation for this, and I was going to call you after and say, Danny, your language.
Oh my goodness. Do you know what? I just that was after Lucy had kind of edited it and cut it back. What's really funny was the fact that it had a watershed warning before the program starts when it was originally aired, and I'm proud to say that watershed warning was down only to my good self.
Well, here in Australia, there probably wouldn't have been any warning on it at all.
Yeah, I bet.
Everyday
Exactly.
vernacular. So, do you happen to know? Do either of you happen to know what the working title was before it became the obviously troublesome wacko about Jacko?
I think it was something like Superfans, or there wasn't anything set in stone from what I recall, but I think it was just going to be MJ Superfans or something along those lines.
All right, let's go back a little bit. What we like to do with our guests is to try to get a gauge on their fan story and sort of their early life. So would you be able to briefly talk to us about where you grew up in England and your childhood and what that was like and when you first discovered Michael?
Yeah, sure. I went to school and did much of my growing up in St. Albans, which is just on the outskirts of London. I did a lot of my growing up inside London too, because all my family are from Kilburn, St. John's Wood, Paddington area. There's a lot of Irish in my family, so years back, Kilburn was like a heavily Irish area, and my family were already there, and I'd go stay with my granddad many weekends, and we'd do stuff together. And my parents had always loved Michael and Motown. In fact, this is one of the first things I told Michael the first time I met him, about when my parents first went to see him when he was like 10 or 11 and they first came to the UK. So I had grown up with Michael's music and Motown and everything of this kind of genre being played around me all the time. My parents had gone to see Michael when he was 11 or 12 when the J5 first came to London. In fact, that was one of the first things I had told Michael when I first met him. And then I just naturally gravitated toward Michael. I became completely mesmerized by Michael, and was like just studied him. I mean, I remember the earliest dream I can remember having is when I was like 4 years old and having a dream that Michael was like in my front room, in my living room, in his bad tour outfit. I remember my parents going to the bad tour. I remember them leaving the hallway as as they were going to the concert, and I was so naughty. I was so naughty for the babysitter out of pure protest that I wasn't going to the show. And I waited up all night for my parents to come back, and they bought me a whole bunch of memorabilia. So really, since before I can remember.
Danny, you mentioned that obviously your parents were fans, and your brother Lee appears in the documentary we spoke about earlier. Was your brother a fan as well? Because one of the I hate to say this, and I'm sorry if this is embarrassing at all. He said at times he found the fandom a bit weird. Has he come across
Yeah,
to your way of thinking a bit more now, or does he still find it a little strange?
my brother seized any opportunity he could to make fun of me or bully me or
That's what brothers do.
say something that was the antithesis of support, you know. So yeah.
So, how important was that parental support of your fandom to you compared to, say, your brother's position?
Oh, my parents were incredibly supportive, so encouraging for me to chase my dream, to follow my heart. I've never taken my SATs exams at school, so when I did my first show in America at 14, I did my first show in New York. It was at the time that I was supposed to have been taking my SATs exams, and even the school were like so encouraging because they had known I had done like talent shows, and everyone knew that I was a Michael fan and how passionate I was, and the performing and everything. And even the school encouraged me to go, and they said you can just retake your exams next year. I never did. So my parents were incredibly supportive, not just with the performing, but I first jumped on a plane on my own to go overseas and see Michael in concert in Munich when I was 14. And I knew my way all around central London because of my family coming from there. And so, like, at 12, 13, 14, I'd be out and about in the streets of London, like, pursuing Michael. And yeah, my parents were very supportive.
That's great. Anika, I'm so glad that you can be here to help us talk with Danny because, I mean, you guys were and still are clearly very close friends. I can't wait to get you back as well so we can really delve into your fan story in particular. Seeing as you were both young fans during the early 90s, can you each remember what it was like being fans through the 1993 allegations?
Mm.
Yeah, so when the 93 allegations came out, I was, I think, only about 9 years old. So I don't have huge amounts of memories about it, but I do remember hearing about it on the news, and I do remember people talking about Michael doing something to a young boy. I don't think I grasped the gravity of it, but I always had an overwhelming feeling of he would never do anything to anyone. And that was my overall impression. I was too young at the time to understand the legalities of it or to understand what the settlement meant. At some point, it all seemed to go away, and things broadly then went back to normal as far as I was concerned, sort of with the MJ world. I think at that point in time, I was more upset because my mum's friend had promised to get me tickets for the Dangerous tour, and that never materialized. So that was my biggest gripe at that time in my life, just being that young as well. Danny, what were your experiences like back in 93? Was it similar?
I remember so clearly, like watching it all on the television in the kitchen and completely standing by Michael and absolutely not believing any of it. And I remember very clearly turning to my mom and saying, "Do you think he did it?" And her just really saying no. I even remember very clearly watching the Neverland broadcast when Michael was on there. I remember at school when I'd gotten back to school, because that happened. I mean, they broke at the end of August, so the new school term was only a few weeks after. And on the playground, that was it. Boom! I was surrounded just by these kids going at me and bullying me. And I was 9 years old, and even then, I stood my ground for Michael. And I remember some kid was coming at me, talking trash about Michael and saying all these derogatory things, and I punched his tooth out.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I went from punching people's teeth out to sitting calmly on the This Morning couch. But yeah, do you know, it's funny looking back at that whole period as an adult now, I realized that those allegations were the end of my innocence in a way. It was the cracking, breaking point of my innocence because of the nature of the allegations. Learning about this word, pedophilia, and then learning what it meant, learning what a child molester is and what sex abuse is, and that those things actually happen. Before that, I was in a world that was full of Disney, Hook, E.T., Michael, He-Man, Ghostbusters, Thundercats, The Karate Kid, and Terminator, where nothing like that happened. So, this it opened up this whole new world to me, that the world can actually is actually not what I was taught that it is. So, as well as being heartbroken that these things were being said about Michael, it was also heartbreaking because for me, it was the early stages of me discovering that there's actually another side to the world than what I've been taught to believe. So that was really difficult.
So that obviously a difficult period at such a young age. As you got older and moved into your teenage years, we get to that sort of 2001 to 2003 era, which I think we can all agree are Michael's pretty difficult years. Obviously, around living with Michael Jackson, the baby dangling incident in Berlin. So how did that affect you as a slightly older teenager, having, as you just said, already lost your innocence? But obviously, we could see for the documentary, your room's covered in posters. You were still a pretty big fan.
Yeah.
How did that sort of time period affect you as a slightly older man?
Oh, my love and admiration for Michael remained ever consistent. I mean, I went to see Michael on his opening Wembley night for the Dangerous tour as my 8th birthday gift, right? So this was something that remained, and I remember it well too. This is something that remained consistent throughout the allegations, throughout Michael being quote unquote unpopular in the public eye. Things like the baby dangling and all this craziness, I was there when that happened. And I remember the following day, at the time Michael's head of security was a very pleasant guy called Mike. And I remember some German fans, going up to Mike, and I overheard them saying, "Is Michael going to apologize for what he did?" And I'm kind of thinking, what the hell did he do? Is Michael going to apologize? And I'm thinking, what? And then I see this picture on the front of the newspaper, and that was my first kind of insight to this whole sensationalized 0.5 second incident that happened, which I had watched and thought nothing of. Yeah, because before we were in the whole excitement of it, we knew nothing of it. And again, I just saw it as something that was just being blown out of proportion. You get back to the UK and you see, there are pictures of Will Smith holding his kids up by the ankles, swinging them around like most kids do to their parents. And you think, well, if that kid slipped by an inch, then he'll break his neck on the floor. But no one questions that. So with me, it's always been like, well, they always target Michael. And then when the whole Living with Michael Jackson documentary came out, as I remember, most people that I had spoken to were completely with Michael. I even remember a poll in the Sun newspaper saying, do you think something, implying like if Michael's a child molester or not, and an overwhelming number of the public being in support of Michael. I think at the time it was like something like 87%. I think the poll came out as defending Michael. That was a really interesting period, But for me, that period was so magical because there were things that I was doing, that I was experiencing, that weren't being projected to the outside world. Like sneaking in to the press conferences at 17 at Reverend Al Sharpton's headquarters in Harlem and sitting about 2 meters at the absolute most, I'd say closer to Michael's side throughout this entire press conferences, if I could call it that. And it's so hot, and Michael's just like dripping with sweat, dabbing his sweat beads from his head, and it was just incredible. Days before that was the second time I had performed for Michael, and he had again come to me and complimented me on my performance. 2 weeks earlier than that, it was my first time I had performed for Michael in London, and again he had taken the time to come up to me personally and compliment me. And when I had first met Michael some years before that, he had, gone out of his way to tell him that he had a videotape of me performing, which he had got at Neverland, and he described the tape to me, so I knew he wasn't, talking shit, and said how much he loved it and enjoyed my performance. So for me, all the media sensationalism was just noise. My reality was just a whole different thing.
I just want to circle back just quickly to the baby dangling part of that, Danny. I just want to just clarify something, because I totally agree with your point that there was perhaps an unfair amount of criticism placed on Michael compared to other people that had done that. But the act itself was not his highest point. And it definitely wasn't something that, like, I would do that with my daughter, and I'd like to think that other people wouldn't do it with their kids as well. What do you think led to that extra criticism on Michael at that point?
Yeah, sure. So, two things. So, firstly, my personal experience from having been there and seen it was that it happened in a finger snap, like it was that quick.
Yeah.
But then when they slowed it down and they had it immortalized in photographs on the front of newspapers, then it became a bigger spectacle. It became somewhat sensationalized. But the second thing being, yes, it most certainly was not Michael's smartest move. You could almost see a 10-year-old child trapped in an adult's body conducting that behavior with a small, vulnerable baby. I certainly don't defend it. I think, I'm quite certain that it's not something that Michael had planned to do. I think he got caught up in the excitement. And I know this sounds really, really bad and controversial to say, particularly around that time period. And even Michael has said himself, between the periods of 2001 to 2003, that, he was under the influence of medication intermittently. It raises the question, had Michael taken something? Like, you never know. Absolutely, as you say, it certainly wasn't a favorable decision and is not an advisable conduct of behavior to any parent with any child.
You talked about meeting Michael quite a few times around this period, and I know that it was something that was talked about within the fan community with people that were meeting Michael at the time. Comments about, oh, was he high today? Or, was he lucid? That kind of thing. What were your observations about Michael's behavior at that time when you were encountering him one on one?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So when you say around that time, you mean specifically like 2001, 2003?
Around the Invincible. Is that the first time you met Michael? Did you first meet him around the Invincible-era, or was it earlier?
No. The first time I'd met him was April 99. So before any of that was ever apparent. That was a whole hour and a half, and he was completely with it. There was no.
Oh, well, tell us the whole story. So how did that come about? An hour and a half meeting with Michael is not something a lot of fans get to experience. So just walk us through that experience.
Yeah, so we had found out, and it's funny now with how fast information spreads with text and WhatsApp and so on, how that spread so quickly, which is that Michael was in the UK on a private visit. Oh, I remember now. He had been spotted in Harrods and was at the Fulham football game with Mohammed Al Fayed, right? And that same Saturday, I was meeting some fans in Leicester Square, just outside the Hippodrome. And when we didn't have phones, you set a meeting point at a certain time, and if people weren't there, 45 minutes later, you just waited because you were like, maybe they're just stuck in traffic or they have a delay on the public transport or something. And so this news had spread like wildfire. Obviously, Mike was photographed. We'd gone to the internet cafe in Piccadilly to get more information on it. And then more fans had come into London. Cut a very long story short, we had found out where Michael was staying at Mohammed Al Fayed's private residence in Park Lane, just a few hundred yards down the road from the Dorchester Hotel. A close friend of mine at the time, who was quite a few years older than me, had uh, a friend who was the head of Sony Music UK at the time, Jonathan Morris. Via Jonathan Morris, we were hearing Michael had told him to tell us that he could see us through the window, that he had been watching us dancing and that he had really enjoyed it. And I mean, I'm 14 years old and I am just like, I can reach for the moon. I'm telling you, I was high. We're sitting there, sitting there, sitting there. It's 11 p.m., 11:15, 11:20 at night. I'm sitting on the side of the pavement talking to my friend, and we're kind of sitting with our knees up on our bums on the edge of the curb, and I'm talking to my friend, and if you can imagine, he's slightly looking over my shoulder, and his face just freezes, and his eyes just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and I say to him, "What's up? What happened?" And he says, "Oh my God, it's him." I said, "What?" He responded, "It's Michael." I turned around, and like a scene straight out of Moonwalker, you can just see Michael's silhouette, except Michael had a fedora on. Like, when Michael sees the children right before the come together sequence, and you can just see his silhouette. And he had a long coat on, but then he took that off, and underneath that, he had a Waldorf Astoria uh, baseball style jacket on. And he walks, and this is a London back street. It is now 11:30 approximately p.m. There are about 10, maybe 15 fans, and Michael gets closer and closer. His silhouette gets bigger and bigger, and me being 14, I'm like holding everyone back, saying, "Stay back, stay back, give him some space, stay back, just keep back," while I continue to walk forward. I just walked straight up to him and I just held his hand and I was just talking like nuts. It sounds crazy. I wasn't what you might say starstruck. I was starstruck, of course, but I wasn't like lost for words. I was so natural and comfortable, and I don't know why, but I was calling him Mike the whole night, like I knew him. And I was just asking the stupidest, silliest shit, and he thought that was hilarious. He just kept laughing so much because I was 14. I guess I was getting away with, if I was 20, I probably would have looked like an idiot, but I was 14, so it looked cute. The first thing I said was, "Oh my God, Michael, I love you so much. My name's Danny Oliver. I'm from London. I love you so much. I've loved you my entire life. You're my biggest inspiration in all the world." And he said, "Oh, thank you so much. I love you too." And then I said, "Michael, my parents went to see you when you were 10 or 11 years old, when you first came to London. And my dad says that he remembers seeing you getting ready in the wings to come on stage, and that you sounded even better live on stage than you did in the studio album. And I never forget, word for word, his response was, "Really? They said that? They said that about me? Really?" I said, "Yeah." They said, "Oh, thank them for me, please. That's wonderful." And it was just like, and an hour and a half later, at one point, he had to go. He was with one bodyguard, so he was with who I'd gotten to know well at the time. He used to nickname me whenever he saw me, mate. He was Skipper. This is Wayne Nagan's brother. He and Michael had to go literally for 5, maybe 10 minutes, no more than that. And then he came back. Perhaps Michael needed the toilet or something. But as Michael was walking off before he returned, I remember he had noticed, in the streets of London, sometimes you can see the small square glass panels that are like above cellars. And Michael, he was in heeled boots, like, say, like a blood on the dance floor style boots. And he was stumping 3 times. He was stumping on this glass panel, I guess curious as to what it was like to dance on. And I just let rip. I just went, "Ow! You go do your thing, boy! Woo!" And then Michael, he crouched over, holding his tummy, laughing. He pointed at me. He took off his fedora. We were maybe 20 feet apart, 30 feet apart at this point. He he took off his fedora, crossed his legs, took a bow, span around and put his fedora back on, and said, "I'll be right back." I mean, and this is like, tip of the iceberg. And then he came back, and yeah, all in all, it was about an hour and a half. He went in at about 1 o'clock in the morning. When people were they had formed this line to talk to Michael, one person after another, and somehow I'd gotten away with consistently staying at the front with Michael holding his hand, talking to him the whole time. And it was incredible. I remember the last question of the whole night, later on in the evening, when everyone had gotten a little hello and whatever, he had stood at the top of these steps by these doors, and people were asking questions. And after a long series of questions, the last question of the night was a question that came from me. And I said, "Is it true that you're getting the bloke, that bloke who plays the Incredible Hulk? Is it true that you're getting him to, like, for your new image, kind of like, you know?" And he he said, "What? What?" And I said, "Well, kind of beef you up, get a bit bulky and get some muscles for a new image." And he erupted into laughter, really, really high pitched laughter. I remember he held his stomach and he was crouching over laughing. And everyone else started laughing. And I was like, "What's so funny?" And I said, "Well, is it true?" And he said, "No, no, no, don't worry about it." That's what he said. "Don't worry about it." That was my first time meeting him in April 11th. So yeah, nearly 25 years to the day.
Blimey. And then you sort of indicated that as time went on and you were encountering him more in the early noughties, perhaps there was a sort of a change in his presentation. So what were your experiences with Mike Hoare and his presentation as you entered those kind of troubled years?
There is nothing overly stand out that I could pinpoint and say, he was definitely off his head. He always appeared to be very coherent. I do remember when I was talking to him in New York one time, and it was just he and I. This was after Reverend Al Sharpton's press conference, and by this point, I'd built a lot of familiarity between he and I with having done the shows. He had the videotape of me. I guess I stood out in a way, perhaps because I was a performer that didn't have like the black wigs on. I had long blonde hair in a ponytail. Like I said, Skipper was very, very familiar with me. And so I remember shortly after Reverend Al Sharpton's press conference, and it was just myself and Michael. I was a very, very fast runner, so I was always able to keep up with the cars and the limos and stuff. And I was talking to him at the car the window was down. And it's funny because there'd been a few moments. At one point, he was really enthusiastic and he had paid me a massive compliment on my performance. And I remember I was so pissed with my performance that I did for him, which was Jam, that I just stormed off the stage. I didn't even look at him. I just walked off because I was so annoyed with it. But then I really felt better about it because he had paid me this massive compliment. And I wasn't even saying, like, oh, I was at the show. But then another time he had seemed really slow in his response. I will say though, it may either be that he was completely bored of any bollocks I had to say, or he seemed quite focused on getting this little chewit out of its wrapper, and it was boiling hot. But I said it to him, and whatever I said to him, and then he kind of turned and he said, "What?" like this. But aside from that, as I can remember, as I can think in this moment, in my one-on-one experience with him, he always came across very, very coherent.
So is this how you and Anika met? Because in the TV show, you're described as being best friends, and that was in 2004, I think.
Yeah.
So how did you guys actually meet and get to know each other?
I'm trying to remember the exact time we met. To be honest, Danny's probably the better one to answer this because his memory of dates and places is insane. I always said you should be a historian, Dan. I think, was it around 97, 96?
Yeah, I think 97, 98-ish. My memory is telling me outside the Dorchester, I think.
Either that or at an MJ day.
Yeah. But Anika and I were like super, super close. So when I say super, super close, like we were on the phone every day for hours at a time. We would have sleepovers.
Yeah.
I would snort and then
God.
snot out onions and mushroom pizza.
Literally.
We had sleepovers. We would watch Michael all night. We would order pizza. We would go out with our parents.
Our parents became good friends.
Our parents became good friends. We all ate out together. Birthday parties. Anika held a fundraiser at her school, her secondary.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, her secondary school, where I was the quote unquote main act. and I had performed there. And it's so funny. Do you remember, Anika? You were so terrified of asking me that you had got your mom to call me and ask me that when I perform if I could
Oh, yes.
if I could not grab my crutch.
Yes. Yeah, because it was my school and we were all so young at the time.
Yeah.
And do you remember that was in aid of
I do.
So I was the shyest kid at school. Like I was the kid that never put my hand up in class or didn't want to be picked on by the teachers or anything like that. And one of the things that you had to do for your English GCSE was an English oral exam. Every parents' evening, should tell the parents the same thing. She's on course for an A star, but unless we can get her to speak, she's not going to get it because she won't get the right grades for achieving that mark. I end up putting on this show, which I hosted, that Danny performed at, and none of the teachers could believe it. And at the end of the show, my English teacher who was there stood up and signed to me that she had graded it and that was going to be my English oral, and I got an A star for that.
It was
there you go.
So thanks, Michael.
It was incredible. I mean, it was such a lovely night, and we have it all on VHS. There was a whole VHS cover done and everything. And Anika, I think, was it you that did like an illustration of Michael doing Dangerous from? You remember the picture for it?
Yeah, I think that was someone else's art GCSE that I managed to rope into it.
Right. Do you remember as well?
I'm curious as to how the TV show came about. So how did they find you? How did this all happen? How did you end up involved in this TV show?
So for me, it was, the trial hadn't started, but the allegations had been made, and there were a number of protests and things that happened in London, and I had organised them. So my number was kind of out there on the I guess that back in the day it was fan forums and things like that. And I think that's how they found me.
With me, I don't remember. I'd have to say I probably got an email or maybe
Or maybe we spoke about it. I don't
I
know.
don't
I can't
know.
remember.
I mean, yeah. Fuck, I don't know how half the people contacted me. Like Louis Theroux, that prick, called me one day on my home phone. I don't know how he got hold of my number. Fucking Uri Geller called. You know, after I did Michael's jacket, I got emails. The second jacket, I got emails from all over the world. Probably a little less than 100 emails of people asking me to recreate replicas, which I wasn't interested in doing. So I don't know how people got in touch.
Why was Louis Theroux ringing you? What did he want?
So Louis Theroux, I had first bumped into him in London in 2002 when Michael was going through, if I remember correctly, Great Marlborough Street, which at the time was where where Sony Music UK headquarters were. And Louis Theroux was there, and I'd always enjoyed the stuff that he'd put out. Not anymore. Um, and yeah, we had got talking, and he was very, very enthusiastic. I mean, clearly he was a fan, and obviously he was covering something. That was in June. I'd seen him the following November in Berlin, and he spent a lot of time talking to me. Him and his camera guy, Will Yap. Then I got a call from him in September 2003, just on my home phone. And he basically wanted to do a whole segment with me in it. So this is long before Anika and I were contacted about doing that TV show. He wanted to do a whole segment with me in his program about Michael, the one where he interviewed Joseph.
Right.
But we spoke quite a number of times over the telephone. He would call my home phone, and we would just talk and talk and talk. And he would ask me about, you know, like, what's your experience with Michael? And at this point, I'd literally just less than a week come back from my first 2 visits to Neverland. And he said, "Oh, Danny, this is amazing. You know, we must get this in the TV show." But, you know, it just never materialized. I'm not sure what happened.
So you mentioned before about the jackets. We've got to provide a little bit of context to the audience about why that's significant. So that's a major moment, I guess, in your story with Michael, in that you made him a jacket that was, I guess, critical of Martin Bashir on the back, in the text that was on the back, right? And tell us the story around that and how Michael came to have the jacket and wearing it.
Yeah, so initially I did a filthy tabloid press one for him, which he had worn in London and in Austria. But the one that really blew up, and I did a third one as well, which was actually in 2005, and Michael loved it, but had not worn it publicly. It was an anti-Snedden jacket, and the back instead read, "He's just a mean old clown trying to take a good man down," and Michael loved it.
That's the one that you waved at him during the trial, right?
Exactly, that is, yes, exactly that. That is the one. But then when he came to London, I had gotten it to him. It made him laugh, which was nice. But yeah, the one that really blew up in the media and the fan community, and even now lingers in the, you know, within the fan community, is the anti-Bashir jacket. And so I remember sitting up in bed with a pen and paper designing that. And originally, so this is before the Martin Bashir documentary came out. This was in 2002. I was designing it and putting it together. And so originally, in the censored sign, it said Sony, but it still had the same writing: "Don't waste your cash on that filthy tabloid trash." I had designed it with the MJDO slogan on the chest and the left upper arm, to like put it on there in case it ever got out. If it ever got any notoriety, no one could steal it and say that they did it, that it was mine. I clearly remember having a fantasy that the jacket blew up so much that this is exactly what I was thinking at the time when I was sitting in bed designing it, that David Letterman had started talking about it on his TV show. I'm just really bold and crazy with my thoughts. And yeah, and that it created like a stir in the media, which is exactly what I wanted it to do, as well as for Michael to enjoy it. Jumping way ahead, when I came back from LA 2003, my mom had called me I was waking up late, and she said, "Have you been to the shops?" And I said, "No, why?" She said, "Go down to the store." She said, "Go look at all the tabloids and then call me back." And I went and I looked in every single tabloid, and they had done all these articles on my jacket. It's exactly what I wanted. But they had made out that Michael had made it because he was so upset that he just couldn't let it go. They had completely spinned it out of context. But it was incredible. I had worn this jacket around Neverland when we had been there the first couple times. A lot of the Neverland staff were coming up and commenting on the jacket and stuff. Kind of fast forward a few days, when I had first given it to Michael at the Beverly Hills Wilshire Hotel, when I first read it to him, I mean, he had been trying to get to me to see what it was all about, to the point that he had gotten fans to go one side of his car to think that he was that side, and then he had quietly told me to go around to the other side, and he had put a finger up to me, meaning, give me 1 second, go around. So he went to the side, and when all the fans, like this swarm of fans, went to that side, he quickly put the window up. He already had the window down ready for me on the other side. So he came to me. So it was just, he was talking to me at the car, on the other side of the car, and I had shown him the jacket and read it out for him. And when I read him out the slogan, "Don't waste your cash on that filthy tabloid trash," he laughed so hard that I remember him holding his head back, and I could see the roof of his mouth. And he loved it. In fact, he loved it so much that during the trial, Michael Bush, came up to me voluntarily to tell me, "Did you know that your jacket, it had been a little bit beaten and battered?" I said, "Yeah, I know." He said, "Oh," he said, "Do you know Michael?" He called me. He said, "Bush, I have a jacket that needs some maintenance, and I want you to fix it for me." He said, "Sure, just send it through." He said a few days later, he'd gotten something through a package through the post from Michael. He said he opened the package. It was my jacket. He said Michael loved my jacket that much that he had wanted Bush to make these alterations and this maintenance. And then he went on to tell me that the jacket meant so much to Michael. So Michael's in the courtroom at this point, right? We're outside the courthouse. He said that Michael had, every morning when Michael woke, before they got him changed to come to court, the first thing Michael put on to wear was my jacket. I mean, that was just amazing.
While we're on the subject of the trial, which is obviously when the TV show is set, when Jamon mentioned earlier that he was going to put the link to the TV show in the show notes, Anika, you expressed something less than enthusiasm for that idea. So I just wondered, is it because you said or did something that you regret in the show, or is it more because you feel that the way it was edited or put together was not particularly fair or representative?
I think it's more of, when you watch something that you did when you were so much younger, and that cringe moment where you're like, oh, did I really say that? Did I really do that? There's a little bit of that in there. Plus, there were some things, I remember having some quite in-depth discussions about the trial, about the cases, and about, reasons why Michael was so important to me. And then, even just watching it back today, some of the things that ended up in the show were the more sort of fanish, if you like, and that wasn't what I was trying to do being in that show. Of course I'm a fan, I'm not trying to hide that, I never have, but I can't even remember, but something along the lines of talking about, I like the fact that he wears jeans or something, and that was part of a bigger conversation. But what goes into the show is talking about, oh, he looks great in jeans, and there were deeper conversations, more meaningful conversations that I wish would have gone in. And even some of the stuff, they were with us in the States, and a lot more happened, I think, out there, and it gets condensed into this hour-long show. And the editing is obviously controlled by them. So yeah, just looking back, and you just think, oh, okay, it's maybe not exactly how I would have liked it to be.
When Michael passed away, they were actually doing a follow-up for that. and Lucy, the director, had interviewed me a few times, and she was so emotional when Michael passed away. I remember her being behind the camera and sobbing, but then it never materialized because I think it was going to be on the BBC, and the BBC had decided not to do any more Michael programs because apparently they'd received a handful of complaints saying there was too much Michael on television at the time.
Didn't stop them commissioning a new Jacques Peretti, though, did it?
Yeah, but yeah, the media will do as the media will do.
I'd like to know from you and Anika about a certain event. So in the early 2000s, there was the Killer Thriller party. And this was a huge moment for Michael fans that got to see him in London on stage, because a lot of this time period was post Invincible, where Michael was sort of rallying against Sony Music. And of course, he'd done his appearances on the top of the bus in London, and he'd been with Al Sharpton in New York. And then we have the Killer Thriller party, where Michael, for the first time, really has a chat with fans on stage about what was really going on in his relationship with Sony Music, and what fans could potentially look forward to in the future. So I'm hoping that you guys could kind of give a brief summary of what it was like to be there for that, and what Michael was like during and around that time period.
Yeah, I mean, it was phenomenal. Like for me, that was another turning point. It was another dream come true. For me, that was the first time I had performed for Michael, and the first time I had shared a stage with Michael. Like I was, on stage with him, standing just a few feet to his side when he was addressing the fans. Yeah, it was incredible. I mean, it's an interesting thing to say, oh, like, how did you think he came across? And because when you're there and you are experiencing it and you are at the highest of high, it can't be anything but great. There's just no possible way to find anything remotely negative to say about it. Backstage, he was complimenting me a lot on my performance, which was lovely. He had taken my dressing room to kind of, I think he was a bit hot, and he was in the dressing room. Yeah, where he was sat, he just spilt all of his nuts and raisins everywhere, which was funny. I do remember someone saying to me, an older fan, saying that they were concerned with the certain things that he said because it didn't seem like him to have said these things, like openly calling, which he again did later in New York 2 weeks later, openly calling Tommy Mottola a devil and all of this. I mean, personally, I felt he was quite composed.
I think he came across quite well during the Killer Thriller party because he had a point to make and he made it well. He explained how he felt and what he felt was happening around him. It was good for people to hear it directly from him, especially with what then happened subsequently. It was good for him to say what he felt he needed to say. And I think also from a fan perspective, for Michael to turn up to a fan event, this is the biggest star in the world, for him to make time to attend something like this, is just so telling of his character. I can't imagine Taylor Swift doing it, for example.
Absolutely.
Careful, you don't want to draw the ire of Swifties.
Oh God, no, she's better than Michael.
I mean, it just goes to show how grateful he was to his fans,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, Danny, you've obviously met and spent time with Michael Jackson on more than one occasion. Were any of those occasions at Neverland, and if so, what was that like?
Actually, inside Neverland, because and Anika was with me when we went to Neverland, and the most we had seen, well, aside from talking to him over the telephone, and I don't know if he was watching a movie on mute or anything, but did he give a shit about what we were saying? I'm joking. I remember seeing him. I mean, we didn't interact with him really directly because at that time it was his birthday, so he had family over. We had because we were like going around just us, and usually they would have a supervised tour. And for us, because I had been friends with someone for many, many years since I was 14, Big Al, and then we had become very close and friendly with some security guys there also. And so we didn't have a supervised tour. We were just allowed to kind of roam and whatever. But we saw some of Michael's relatives kind of in the arcade area and stuff. So Michael was preoccupied with guests in the house.
Hadn't he just taken Prince to the dentist or something as well? And Prince was upset
Yeah,
because Brian, the security, he told me at one point, stand by because we think Michael's going to come out to see you guys.
that's right. That's right.
Because it was Michael who had told them to let us in
Yeah,
because he recognized some of
that's
us.
right. Because he had gone out to
and then,
take Prince to the dentist,
yeah,
and I said all the other fans went off looking for him. I said,
yeah,
listen, let's hold back, stick around. We don't know our way around this area. Let them go and look for him and get lost in the woods. I said, we'll stay here. Michael will come back. We're the only ones. Who knows? And at this point, I was like parading my jacket around as well. And then he had wound the window down and said for us to come in.
mm.
And then that's when Brian had approached us. I remember him going around on the golf buggy, but it may not have been on that day. But on that day, we didn't talk to Michael directly. It was his birthday, so they had told us that he had guests over and family. I think that was the day before his birthday, right? That was the 28th, August 28th.
Yeah, it wasn't his actual
Yeah.
birthday, but it was around then. Yeah.
In the TV show, it mentions that Anika, you got into court a couple of times, but the TV show cuts off before the trial proper has begun. So I was just wondering about both of your experiences in Santa Maria as the trial continued. Whether you ever actually ended up getting into court, and Anika, what your experiences were when you did get into court.
So being in court was fascinating. I think I was in on the day when they were talking about how Janet Arvizo had sort of consulted with a lawyer before even having met Michael about possible claims or something along those lines. So that was really interesting to hear. I think just watching Michael and his body language and his demeanor, you could see the extreme level of stress that he was under, unsurprisingly. But there was also, being in there made me feel a little bit more confident because witnessing how everything was being dealt with and the way the proceedings were moving, it just gave me a little bit more confidence that it was being handled sort of the best possible way it could.
What was it that you witnessed that gave you that confidence?
I didn't see cross-examinations as such, but just hearing the way the lawyers would stand up and address the difference in both sides. You could see sheer professionalism on the one side, and then you had Snedden and Co. And, as we saw with the way the trial progressed, their whole case was a load of nonsense, and they didn't present as well. Maybe that's my bias coming across, but they didn't present as well as Michael's team did. And for me, there was a very clear difference.
And Danny, did you ever get in? Did you ever win the lottery?
No, I didn't. No, I was one of the peasants waiting outside. No, I didn't. I was just outside creating a lot of noise and waving my jacket around and jumping back in the car and cursing and swearing at traffic.
Were you guys there for the verdict?
I wasn't.
Yes.
Anika was.
Yes, I was there for the verdict. I was there with Shawnee, in fact.
Tell us about the verdict day.
Verdict day was every emotion you could possibly experience, all in the space of a couple of hours. We were at the courthouse and we heard that a verdict had been reached. We were obviously waiting for it for several days, but the minute you heard that the verdict was in, the level of adrenaline, the fear that this was it, this was going to be the deciding moment in terms of whether justice was going to be served or whether I personally didn't think I wasn't I couldn't imagine if it had gone to a guilty verdict. I couldn't imagine Michael leaving. I just didn't, it was that what on earth would happen situation. And I remember waiting and just sobbing because I was just so scared, even though I knew the details of the case and even though I was confident that Michael was innocent. at the end of the day, it was up to the people on the jury, and you can never predict which way that's going to go, especially with the way the media had been and all the reporting, and they were ready for a guilty verdict, and there was no escaping that. And I remember Shawnee and I were standing on this ladder thing very close to Dove Lady, and someone had some kind of radio or something that we were listening as they started reading out the verdicts, and the relief and the elation as each verdict was read out. It was to the point where they could hear the cheering inside the courtroom.
God.
But it was one of the most emotional days I think I've ever experienced.
Yeah, I remember falling to my knees. I was on a call with Nima, and I was just on my knees in hysterical tears. Just, thinking back to like when it all started in '93. My mum was hysterical as well. It was so emotional after all that he had endured, and how much weight he had lost, and just how much he'd been tormented. You just think like, what other human being could have endured this and still walked out standing on their own 2 feet?
I just can't. A thing that kept running through my mind was, can you imagine leaving your home that day, not knowing if you were ever going to come back to that home? And how do you say goodbye to your children that day?
Absolutely.
It wasn't just like another court day where he knew he was coming home, after court, as difficult as the trial was.
Yeah.
How do you say goodbye to your children that particular day?
And it makes you think, like, because to my knowledge, Michael obviously had kept the children completely shielded from everything that was happening. So what did he tell them? I mean, just what was going on in his head, on top of what the verdict was going to be. I'm sure he knew in his heart he was going to be acquitted, as we all did. But again, you never know 100%, because you just can't be 100% sure.
Danny, let's fast forward a few years beyond the trial. So we had the This Is It era. So I can imagine, like the rest of us, you must have been so excited for the This Is It era. I can't imagine what it would have been like as a London fan, knowing that he was going to hit the stage in your home city, and you'd have the chance to see him live at the O2. When Michael passed away on that horrible, horrible day in June, what was that day like for you? What can you remember about that day?
Oh my goodness, I remember every moment. Dare I remember it in detail? I was with a friend, and we were in Southend. We were walking along the beach. We were writing Michael's name in the sand and talking about how excited we were to see him live. And I just remember thinking, like, oh, how can my life be this great? Oh, Michael's back is back. Oh, it's going to be so amazing. I said to her, that my friend I was walking along the beach with, I said, I just can't imagine it's too good to be true. I said, when I see it in my head, I almost see it like a CGI animation, kind of like of the Madison Square Garden concert. I said, that's how surreal it is. Like, I can't imagine it being real. This is just 2 weeks from now. How can it be? Anyway, we were walking back to her car. We got in her car. I left my phone at her house. She left her phone in the car. She'd gotten all these messages. She starts reading the messages out to me. And I just immediately, oh, what a load of nonsense, all this tabloid crap. And then she read out another message, and I said, oh, yeah, they're obviously in on it together. And then the first thing that alarmed me was she said, yeah, but those two people don't know each other. And I said, okay, so it's a rumor that's circulating. It's stupid. And then I took her phone, which she had put on vibrate, and I held it while she was driving. And we'd put some J5 on that we were listening to on the drive back to her house, which I was trying desperately to distract myself with, while I could feel her phone on my leg the entire drive back to her home, vibrating non-stop, which which was scaring me, which I was becoming increasingly concerned. We went back to her house, and by this point, I'm already convinced something is up. And I run upstairs, grab my phone, and see that I've got 47 missed calls, 100 and something, if I remember correctly, 32 messages. And I just, like, I'm petrified, terrified. And the first person I jump on the phone with after kind of skim reading the messages is a friend of mine. Charlie knows him also, David Lumby. And just like, okay, this is real. Something's happening. Something's happening. And we're just crying, crying, hysterically crying on the phone. And then my friend and her mum switched on the news. It's all over the news. Okay, this is Sky News. They got, live feed going on. Something's not right. Something's up. And then I'm like, this has got to be, it's got to be some really far-fetched publicity stunt. But Michael doesn't need a publicity stunt. Like, no, this can't be. This can't be. No, Michael has children. He's been through too much. There's no way this can be. So I'm driving home. Now, on the way home, all I know is that Michael has been hospitalized. I don't know anything more than that. Thank God. I didn't know anything more than that at the time. My friend Nima had called me. My mom had told him to call me because I wouldn't talk to her. I'd only talk to him. He knew that the worst had already happened, but he deliberately not told me because he knew I was driving home. I got home and I saw the news, and I just fell to my knees. I was hysterical. I was beyond hysterical, heartbroken, shattered. And I just remember screaming. I just remember screaming, I believed in you. I believed in you. Meaning, God, I believed in you, God. Like, how can something like this happen? He's been through so much. I just, I couldn't even completely go into my whole kind of experience at the time because it just take me back. But I had the darkest of thoughts. Like, when I was driving home, I wasn't even sure if it was the worst news ever, if I could handle it. It was just, yeah, it was horrible. And then, the memorial and everything, the moment they brought him in, I was just hysterical from start to finish. I was just really, really hysterical. And then when
Yeah.
Marlon said his piece and Paris said her piece, that just tore me up even more. It's crazy. It's horrible. What helps me kind of navigate it is doing my shows in tribute to Michael and seeing people celebrate Michael and kind of being a small contribution to that from one audience to the next.
Yeah, it is hard to relive that day, and I think it's hard to talk about it, and it was a horrible day, of course, but I think on some level, it is useful as fans, especially our listeners who may not be as connected with other Michael Jackson fans as we are, to hear what it was like for others to experience that day and sort of relate to it. Coming out of that, you've shared some amazing stories with us today, meeting Michael, spending time at Neverland, performing for him on stage, all of these incredible things. I've got to ask you, Danny, I want to do a really quick set of rapid fire questions as we wrap up. I want to ask you to get a sense of like what your favorite Michael Jackson things are. Okay. So I want you to answer like super quick. Just give me the first thing that pops into your head.
Okay.
What's your favorite Michael album and why?
History, because I find it to be the most powerful and autobiographical album that Michael's ever done.
Favorite song he ever did and why?
Oh my God, that is so difficult. I know my favorite song to perform, and one of my favorite to see Michael perform, Jam,
I love Jam.
because it's just got so much to it. It's just got the energy, and there is so much to it. There's so much depth to it, with the rhythm and the lyrical content as well. I really appreciate. I absolutely love Jam. That is my jam. I cannot stand still, and I love Michael's live interpretation of it. I think it's one of the best live interpretations he's done. The absolute best opening song that he's done to any tour.
Short film.
Ghosts. I would say Ghosts. Ghosts. Oh, but then now we've got Thriller in 4K, and I've got a whole new appreciation for it. Does Moonwalker count as a short film? No, that's more of a feature, isn't it?
No, it counts as a very, very long film.
Yeah. I would say Ghosts if we can still at 39 minutes, if we can still call that a short film. Does that count? If Ghosts counts, I'll say Ghosts. If not Ghosts, then I would say, oh goodness, it's so difficult. Thriller, I guess.
Okay, tour.
Used to be History Tour, but now hands down, without a shadow of a doubt, Dangerous Tour. I think it has the
I'm
most.
really glad you changed that, because Charlie Thompson's on the
I
line.
know.
You don't want to see.
Do you know what? It's so funny. I kid you not. As I said that, I only had Charlie's face going through my head.
Okay, what about favorite single performance?
Wow, a favorite. I would have to say Scream from Munich '97. That was for Charlie. No,
I was going to say.
Oh boy, Billie Jean or Working Day and Night from a Dangerous Tour concert, or possibly Bucharest, or Man in the Mirror from Copenhagen. Yeah, that's really a tough one.
Okay, and last one. What's your favorite Michael look, fashion-wise?
Ooh, favorite Michael look. I love the In the Closet look, just because it's just so kind of raw, and he's got his fro hair out there with, no extra little bits, and his little fro ponytail, and he looks kind of just very natural in that. Yeah, I like the whole kind of live tour look as well, with the long curly hair. The live world tour trademark.
Love it. Thank you so much for those answers, Danny. And also, Anika, I really appreciate that you were able to be here to help chat with Danny about his story, because so much of it, was shared with you as his close friend, especially during those early years. And I hope we can get you back at some point in the future as well to talk more specifically about your story.
Sounds good. And thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you guys very, very much for your time.
That's okay. We'll just wrap up now by going around the table and getting everybody's contact details. So, Danny, if people want to find you online and find out more about you and contact you, where can they do that?
Yeah, on Twitter and Instagram at Danny MJ Oliver, or you can check out my website, mjeternity.com, or go on Facebook and YouTube and search Danny Oliver Michael Jackson tribute.
Wonderful. That's great. Anika, also, I'd love to get your details as well for folks. It can't go unsaid that you also run MJ Innocent, an incredibly valuable resource for fans around the world to follow on places like Twitter, to be kept up to date with all things relating to the allegations and Dan Reed and what's currently happening in court.
Thank you. Yep, best place to find me is the MJ Innocent Twitter, which is at MJ Innocent UK.
Wonderful. Charlie Thomson.
Yes, so I'm on Twitter at CE Thomson, and I'm on Instagram at CE Thomson Journo, JOURNO.
Fantastic. And Charlie Carter.
Instagram at Alpha Charlie Photos, especially if you want to see pictures of airplanes, and Twitter at Charlie W. Carter.
That is fantastic. And of course, if listeners want to track us down online, we're the MJCast on all the different social networks. Feel free to go to our website, themjcast.com, to see our catalogue of episodes there. You can also email us at themjcast@icloud.com. We'd love it if you could subscribe to us on a podcast app, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Please rate and review us. That really helps with show visibility. That would be fantastic. We've got some great episodes coming up in this season. We can't wait to continue into our 10th season of the MJCast. Just thank you so much to all of our guests that came on today. Thank you, Danny, again, and thank you, Anika, for joining the MJCast.
Thank you guys so much. Massively appreciated.
We'll see you guys back for our next episode in a month or so. Until then, keep Michaeling.